Janet Chamber, Programme Sound.
Good morning everybody and welcome to the 73rd meeting of the Economy Committee. Just to highlight that some members will be attending this morning's meeting via Startegy, and the witnesses for today's briefing will attend via, or some of our witnesses will attend via Startegy. The meeting will be broadcast live when open to the public, and a recording will be made available on the committee's web pages on the Assembly website. The briefing from the Minister will be Hansarded, as is normal protocol, and just to remind members to mute their tablet devices by pressing F4 on their tablets. So just moving on then to item number 1, which is apologies. And we have apologies this morning from Stuart.
Yeah.
I think everybody else is already here.
I think so, Chair.
So moving on then to item number 2, which is draft minutes. There is a copy of the draft minutes from the meeting held on the 22nd of September at page 6 of your pack. So are members content that those are an accurate reflection of the meeting?
Great.
Okay, thank you. So moving on then to item number 3, which is Chair's business. There's a couple of items in our packs. At page 3 of table papers, there is an invite from the City of London Corporation to me as committee chair to meet with its policy chair, Catherine McGuinness, who will be here on the 15th of October. So are members content that the clerk would go ahead and arrange this meeting, and I can provide an update then to the committee following that meeting?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then page 4 of table papers, there's a request from Queen's University academics who are asking to give evidence to the committee around climate and sustainability at the beginning of November to coincide with COP26, which is obviously the UN Climate Change Conference, which begins just at the end of October and runs into November. So would members be content to schedule a briefing at a time, obviously taking account of priorities in relation to legislation and other things that we will have to deal with, but if we can get that in there, it would probably be very useful.
Look to do that, Chair.
Thank you. Then pages 10 to 55 of table papers, there is a clerk's memo and a number of background papers following the informal meeting last week with the Institute for Global Food Security at Queen's to discuss the findings of their report on industrial hemp opportunities. It was really an informative meeting, and a lot of work going on, not just in relation to hemp but to other natural fibres, and some considerable opportunity and potential there. So Peter, do you maybe want to add anything?
Chair, yeah, we were given background, not just as Chair says in industrial hemp, but also the new applications of linen and nettles, nettles predating both linen and hemp. The experts we spoke to are already working with the two universities, with InvestNI and with DAERA, and it's really just an opportunity to try and bring together an expert group to look at the applications of fabrics, combining technology, and essentially what they need is funding for a person to set all that up. So if members are content, we would talk to Invest about the work that's already been done, see just exactly how involved they are and how they see that expert group idea. Also writing to the ERA committee to let them know that we're looking at this, because it falls into that remit as well. And then potentially looking to write to the Minister about setting up the expert group. But it's probably best to talk to Invest first and see just what they've done, if members are content.
Yes.
Thank you.
And we had also a couple of proposals in there to write to the ERA Minister and...
Chair, what I'll do is once
the ERA committee, sorry.
Once I've got a sense from Invest what they've done, then we'll bring back the other actions. I can bring back, a report on exactly where they're at. It'll just give us more information to write on.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And then, not in our packs, but the Children's Law Centre has been in touch asking for a meeting to discuss the issues of 16 and 17-year-olds receiving the High Street Voucher. Obviously, this is something the committee has discussed and has advocated for. So we can see if we would like to maybe schedule that as an informal meeting to obviously try and accommodate it within the constraints that we are dealing with our own agendas as well.
Chair, absolutely. We'll probably look to do that as an informal meeting, just in terms of scheduling reasonably quickly.
Yep. Are members content to do that?
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on then to item number 4, there is a departmental briefing on the energy strategy, and this briefing will also be Hansarded. There is a clerk's memo at page 16 of our packs, a written briefing from the department on the energy strategy at page 28, a copy of the University of Exeter academics report on energy governance at page 34, and then the PAC report from last week on generating electricity from renewable energy at page 90. So just our officials are already with us, so if I could welcome to the meeting Richard Rogers, who is Head of Energy Group in DFE, Thomas Byrne, who is Director of Energy Strategy in DFE, and Maeve Carmichael from Energy Division DFE. So if I hand over to yourselves to make an opening statement, and then we'll open it up to members for questions.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for the opportunity to provide an update on the development of the energy strategy. As members are aware, we've provided a number of previous briefings, and so we'll focus just for a moment on recent developments. It's worth recapping that collaboration has been at the heart of the work that we've done on the strategy over the past 2 years. And we brought together right across central government and local government, relevant arm's length bodies, the Utility Regulator, Consumer Council and other consumer representatives and business representatives, and of course the energy industry, and most importantly consumers themselves as we've developed where we've got to so far. The strategy, though led by Department for the Economy, is an executive strategy, and as members know, we published an options consultation back in March this year that covered the full breadth of the policy responsibilities across government, not just for economy. The consultation was widely promoted, and we tried to make it as accessible as possible. And we ended up with 283 responses, which is over four times more than responded back in 2010 for the last energy strategy, the Strategic Energy Framework back in 2010. That just shows you the wide interest, the wide engagement that there is on energy today. We were also really pleased that over half of these responses came from consumers. I think there's quite a bit of feedback on the line, Chair.
We're not hearing it, Richard,
Yeah.
so...
Okay, get on, thanks. Consumers, both domestic and businesses. We held 8 focus groups directly with representatives of consumer groups and included consumers in vulnerable circumstances and living with disabilities, and we surveyed over 150 businesses. This all helps to ensure that consumers are at the centre of our strategy. And we also held really countless virtual stakeholder engagements with consumers and businesses. The outcome of the options consultation was that we had overwhelming support for the proposals that we put forward, an average 85% support across the 78 questions. And this shows that our focus on evidence and collaborative approach has led to the proposals having widespread buy-in. We're now working urgently to finalise the strategy, and as the span of it is right across the executive, we need to share it with other ministers to review before sharing the final draft with the Economy Committee and subsequently publishing it, which we would hope to do with a fair wind before the end of October. Final thing I would say is we absolutely understand the need to focus on delivery and have already begun work on a supporting action plan, which will be published before the end of this year. We have established a programme board bringing together a range of departments across government to oversee the delivery of the strategy. And we look forward to also sharing that action plan with the committee members before it is published. If I could finish by inviting Thomas, we've got a little animation that was used to try and make the consultation more accessible. And he's going to try and just play it now. It lasts for 2 or 3 minutes.
Thanks, Richard. I'll just share my screen here and play that animation.
Climate change is a reality facing us all. We must all work together and act now in order to achieve net zero carbon energy by 2050 and secure a greener, healthier and more resilient energy future for everyone. We are developing a new Northern Ireland energy strategy that puts you at the very heart of our plans. We are proud of our magnificent landscape and want to protect this for all who live and work here now and in the future. By working together, we can reduce our carbon emissions and create our energy future, one where we can grow, thrive and prosper on this beautiful land. Our new energy future will mean big changes for us all and will impact how we live, work and travel. Some changes will be challenging, but can create many opportunities, such as new jobs, local investment and better insulated homes and workplaces. We can tackle fuel poverty, create a greener economy and secure a healthier environment and lifestyle for us all to enjoy. Energy should be affordable for everyone. We want to ensure the benefits and costs on our journey to net zero carbon energy are shared fairly. We are in this together, and we need you to help us achieve our goals. Have your say and help us shape Northern Ireland's energy future. Together, we can enjoy a greener, cleaner and more prosperous Northern Ireland.
There we go. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So, are you content to bring it back now to members for some questions? Okay, no, that's great. Thank you. So, obviously, I think the 283 respondents to the consultation does speak to the huge level of interest, and I guess that the context of the climate emergency and the great deal of public discourse around that has obviously impacted the interest, from the general public in responding to the energy strategy, given the role that that's going to play. I'm glad to hear that we were going to hopefully see something before the end of October. That was one of my first questions, was in relation to the time frame around the final version of the strategy. So that's useful to be aware of. The committee will look forward to that. And I guess just looking at recalling some of the questions that were in the consultation document, 79 odd questions, but is there anything in particular in terms of the responses that you would like to highlight? I know there was numerous questions, for example, around having a one-stop shop for energy advice and support. What was the feedback in relation to that? In relation to the types of support schemes or incentives that might be necessary, was there specific feedback in relation to that, or different views even that might be useful for the committee to get some understanding of?
Sorry, Thomas, if I just immediately, just a couple of words and then I'm going to hand over to Thomas for a bit more detail. Chair, there was overwhelming support for the one-stop shop, and I think that's going to be really important about communication and education, and for people who want to who actually want to move to zero carbon fuel at homes and in businesses. We do need the right advice. We need people to be able to understand how they're going to do it. As you would imagine, there was widespread support for renewable energy in general and self-sufficient renewable energy in particular. And I think listening to the debate on the small-scale renewable energy yesterday, one of the committee members there is Bill. He used the word stagnation, and I think that's an important part of the feedback, where we've had no renewable energy support in government for several years now, either in electricity or heat. And I think it's going to be really important that that's why I mentioned in my opening remarks, that we move urgently once the strategy is agreed by the executive, move urgently to the delivery, ongoing delivery, and that is monitored very closely. So, Thomas.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And again, you mentioned there that we received overwhelming support for the proposals put forward, which is absolutely right. Indeed, there wasn't a single question, a single proposal we put forward where the majority of people didn't support it. And even those who had comments on it were more about potentially slightly different ways we might want to think about it in terms of how we take it forward rather than opposition to it. The one-stop shop did receive very, very strong support from respondents to it, particularly from consumers and consumer representatives. And in addition to the consultation itself, we held a number of workshops directly with consumers to actually listen to them and engage them in conversation to find out what their key issues were. And one thing we found was that there was a key message. A key message was that there was widespread awareness of climate change and the need to address it. However, this wasn't enough in itself to actually bring about change, bring about behavioural change. People said what they needed was leadership, they needed information, they needed direction and financial support, ultimately, if we were going to deliver the types of behavioural changes that we need. So this is why the one-stop shop is vital. This is why it's key to the consumer principle and the strategy. And indeed, almost 90% of response to the consultation supported that. What we also found from the sessions with consumers themselves was that really affordability is a major concern for them. What is this going to mean for consumers' bills? How do we make sure people are not left behind? And this is why we've put affordability really front and centre as part of the vision for a new energy strategy, and sought to make sure that when we develop support, it'll be accessible to all and the appropriate protections will be there in place for those most at risk of being left behind. So we got a lot of really good insightful feedback from consumers as part of the consultation.
Thanks for that, Thomas. That's really helpful. And if I recall the document that came along with the consultation, the scenarios for decarbonisation, and you had put forward the various scenarios: high electrification, high gasification, and then a more diverse scenario. I was just wondering if there's specific feedback in relation to that. Obviously, significant discourse at the minute in relation to, in particular, gas prices, but also other fossil fuel prices that are going through the roof and putting real pressure on particularly low-income families looking into the winter months. And obviously, all of us know that this isn't an overnight move away from fossil fuels, but that we are now setting the trajectory for 2030. So just in relation to the kind of feedback in relation to the specific scenarios, and have you kind of landed on what might be the way forward?
Yeah, just for again, I'll start on this and then hand over. There is no silver bullet. We've been very clear on that from the beginning, and that's the feedback we get. So we're going to end up, and this is why the Committee for Climate Change referred to a balanced pathway. We've had a really good example this summer of when the wind hasn't blown and it's been very unusually calm in this part of the world, that we do need the backup generation to keep the lights on. So what we're going to need to support the electrification and electrification through renewable electricity is proper storage, whether it's a form of batteries or decarbonised gas. Just to address for one moment the really challenging circumstances we find coming into this winter, and we're certainly very focused on this along with colleagues in particular the Department for the Communities and the Department of Finance, over how to support what has been a significant increase in fossil fuel prices. We had the announcement by Firmus of 35%, and by SSE Electricity, who have a majority of customers in the Greater Belfast area, of 22%, which will apply from the 1st of October. And also very concerningly, the year-on-year increase, according to the Consumer Council weekly survey, the year-on-year increase since last September has been 70% on heating oil prices. So it's going to be really challenging this winter, and we need we're trying to work out how we deliver some short-term support to consumers to be able to heat their homes and keep them healthy during the winter. But that's why Thomas referred to affordability as being really important as we develop this balanced pathway to net zero. The exciting opportunity, I suppose, is that we've been subject for more than 100 years to the volatility of fossil fuels, whether it was initially coal and then oil and gas. And it's this volatility. I mean, Brent crude prices are up to $80 a barrel. You know, that's doubled from $40 a barrel over the past year, and we've seen the consequences of that. The balanced approach to the future, the balanced scenario, if you like, is to try and produce as much energy as possible from our own resources, whether it's wind or solar or hydro or biogas from the land. And that enables us to have a more stably priced energy future. But of course, we also have to remember that it has to be energy efficiency first, because the most cost-effective unit of energy that we use is the one that we don't have to use. So, Thomas, is there anything further, Maeve, you'd like to add?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Just again, in terms of incorporating some of the responses back from the consultation and also other evidence that we've looked at, I think really there were three probably key components to what we got back and which will be incorporated within the strategy itself. And I think, as Richard said, the first of those is energy efficiency first. Any scenario we put forward in the consultation had significant reductions in the energy we use. And I think no matter what we do in terms of our energy sources, that always has to be first. And so that will be first and foremost in part of the strategy that we bring forward, and a really strong focus on energy efficiency first. I think the second key message was about making sure that we not only make the most of our current renewable electricity resources, but then grow and expand that. So a lot of support for a target of at least 70% of renewable electricity by 2030. Support for putting in place support for example, heat pumps to start to electrify heating, and also support for infrastructure around electric vehicles to help to electrify transport as well. So again, alongside energy efficiency, growing our renewable electricity base and widening the reach of electricity will be important as well. And I think importantly, a third message was that we will need diversity in our energy mix in the future. It can't just be about electricity and the renewable electricity sector, although that will be a key part of it. We also need to be taking forward trials, demonstrations and pilots of a wide range of various different energy sources as part of our future energy mix. So that might be around decarbonised gas, biomethane, hydrogen. It might be around geothermal. And indeed, it's not just about the technologies themselves, but it's how they work in consumers' homes. So even how heat pumps work in different houses and in different circumstances and things like that. So I would say that's probably the key messages that we got back and the key feedback in terms of scenarios that will ultimately inform what the strategy looks like.
If I could just add, Chair, a line or two on the scenarios also. They've been particularly useful in understanding the system as a whole, in the sense that we understand that we have to move to net zero energy, and that impacts across all energy sectors. So it's the first time that scenarios had been developed specifically for Northern Ireland using this model, and has been a very useful tool for communication in terms of policy development, but also communication externally, because what they really help to illustrate is that the trade-offs have to be made when you think of the energy system as a whole. So if you make an ambitious leap forward in one particular sector, that will have impact on others. Similarly, if you pull back on ambition, but in respect of, say, for example, energy efficiency, then more needs to be done elsewhere. So the scenarios themselves, we got very useful feedback from them, and we have refined scenarios for the strategy that will be published shortly, reducing down to effectively modelling a single scenario for 2030. And as with all scenarios, it's modelling, it's asking what ifs, and then refining based on feedback to further scenarios out to 2050.
That's all really helpful and I think really important points there, and specifically in relation to the energy efficiency piece and reducing what we actually use in terms of energy is going to be key. I think it's an absolute no-brainer, and I think the point about it being an executive strategy is particularly important in that aspect of it. And if we are going to tackle those high levels of fuel poverty and ensure, Richard, as you said, that people can have warm homes and all of the benefits and necessity that goes with that in relation to health and mental health and everything else. But how is the strategy going to suggest ways that will be achieved, and specifically in terms of how those who are least able to afford it are able to access a specific scheme in relation to energy efficiency for their own homes?
The simple answer is absolutely yes, and we need to do more and faster, and that's why it's fundamentally important that we're joined up with the Department for the Communities and the Department of Finance in particular, and also one of the important aspects of this too is linking in the Department of Health, because in the initiative in Belfast, which has been in association with the local healthcare trust. We've been able to target, collectively, people who are most vulnerable, people who have the colder homes, people who can't afford to do it for themselves, and it's made a big difference. And quite frankly, it actually keeps people out of hospital and actually reduces excess winter death. So, we're really focused on that, and we need to redouble our efforts, because this is not going to be done overnight, unfortunately, but it needs to be a clear plan of action over the coming years.
No, thanks for that. I'm going to bring in some other members now for questions, and first up is Sinead. Can we bring Sinead into the spotlight, please, Tommy?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for your presentation. And I'm sure you're very pleased with the level of responses that you've received to the consultation and the strategy. And that's good news, because people are really engaged in this conversation, I think now more than ever. And I suppose the whole affordability question and security and sustainability question is really never more prevalent than at the moment as well. But I'm kind of wondering, okay, when we get the strategy and we start implementing the strategy and buy-in for everyone, what do you think are the key issues that are currently holding Northern Ireland back in terms of energy regulation and governance? Because that's a key issue. You can have all the strategies in the world, but if you haven't got the right regulation and buy-in from government and all departments, then it flounders, and it flounders very, very quickly. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to make sure that we have buy-in and people understand. So there's a public messaging piece in that. So where are you with that? Because the two, developing the strategy, doing the consultation, but alongside that, there has to be a big piece and framework built around it for governance and regulation.
The question you raised there, Sinead, is really fundamentally important. I would go as far to say immediately that the energy legislative framework is not fit for purpose. It was established effectively for the privatisation of Northern Ireland electricity back in the mid-90s. It was expanded into gas for the advent of gas in the mid to late 90s. And it established joint responsibilities for our department, economy, and the utility regulator, and indeed the Consumer Council, to develop the energy industry and protect consumers. The deficit in that over the past 30 years has clearly been that 65% of homes at the moment use heating oil, and that's never been regulated. It's never been part of energy legislation, and the protection isn't there. And part of the protection, it's not overly helpful to people whenever gas companies and electricity companies announce price increases, but at least it's subject to the scrutiny of the regulator. So to that extent it works, and we know that the prices that are being charged by effectively the incumbent monopolies of the past are scrutinised and are fair, whereas we rely on the competitive market, which, to be fair, tends to work in the heat and oil sector. But there is no scrutiny of the costs there, but having said that, there is good competition. But if we look forward, we have to rewrite the energy legislation, because it has to be about zero carbon energy. And it is going to take, quite frankly, 2 to 3 years to rewrite energy legislation. And that cannot be an excuse for doing nothing. We have to be doing stuff now, and we recognise that. And the challenge is that we have to do it in a way that is legal, because you know what will happen is that we'll end up in a judicial review if it's not done properly, or we don't have the legislative virus. So we've got to tread very carefully through the pathway to deliver stuff today that we can do under the current legislation, while at the same time fundamentally reforming the legislation. And certainly, that will be one of the important work streams that will be in the action plan, and we'll be measured by the output of that. But we desperately need the resource to do that, because as you say, it does need to change. So things, for example, the one-stop shop, things for actually supporting the development of renewable energy, they will have to be explicitly in the new energy legislation. Yeah, we are, and we will continue to be very focused on that. And we certainly don't want it to be a reason why we cannot act in the short term to do the right thing.
There's maybe another point. Sorry, Thomas. There might be another point to the question with regards to communication, and it is fundamental. And Thomas did reference earlier the fact that the consumer workshops and the consumer engagement that we've held has told us that there is a dearth of information, of trusted information. There are those who don't know that changes need to be made. There are those who are aware but don't know where to go. They don't know enough about it. The one-stop shop is crucial for that. But beyond the one-stop shop itself, we do understand the need for communication from government, and it's not for the Department for the Economy to do a solo run on communication on these issues. But it is something that we have been talking to, and will continue to work with other departments on the messaging of changes that are coming, changes that government will need to lead on and to deliver, but also support people through. So when you look at what we have put forward as the draft strategy, based on what came back from responsive consultation and the workshops engagement we've had, it runs across from information and awareness, and that's a long-term plan. That's not a single year or we launch a strategy. That's a long-term plan from here to 2030. What has to happen and how much time do people need in advance of changes to be able to be part of those changes? It addresses obviously the development and delivery of the one-stop shop, which is going to be crucial, and people will want to trust that one-stop shop and the impartiality of it, etc. But also then it looks at the redress and protection frameworks that people might need. As Richard has already pointed out, the fact that we have regulated sectors and areas that will need new regulation where there are currently no barriers for regulation and protection. And also then within that single principle of placing you at the centre, it's the support framework for affordability. And that's something that, as said, comes back very, very strongly in responses. How can we afford this? And it's how can we spread affordability evenly and fairly across different populations and different consumer groups over a period of time. It's upfront investment. We're talking long-term savings. We need to get that balance right.
Sorry, can I just come in here a second as well? I take all the points made, but regulations, nothing drives behaviours like regulations, and particularly around building regulations for energy efficiency in our homes. And we have a dearth there, and that needs to be addressed like as a priority. And I know this is not an easy thing to do, and it doesn't happen overnight, but it has to be a priority in order to drive the efficiencies that we actually need, and to make sure that we're building homes for the future rather than building homes now that are no longer fit for purpose once we actually enact and move forward with our new energy strategy and new energy policy, because the actions that we take today will have an influence on our targets of tomorrow. So thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Sinead. Claire?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I suppose it's just in relation to the energy strategy and how you're working with other departments to ensure that it will be effectively implemented. And I mean specifically around planning policy. It's all very well us talking about renewables and the opportunity to provide more renewables in Northern Ireland, but if the current planning policy doesn't enable that, then we're going to find ourselves within difficulties. So I'd be quite keen to hear the department's view on current planning policy and if it is conducive to the strategy that you hope to publish in the next number of months. And I would probably even add in relation to the grid issues that we have and the capacity there, what's required from that perspective to ensure that we can fully implement this energy strategy. I've been speaking with various people from the industry, and they're just saying that the planning policy, isn't there. I've written to the Department for Infrastructure. They're telling me that the Minister just doesn't get it. So I'd be keen to hear the Department for Economy's view on this in terms of how it works with their strategy. Thank you.
If I could just start on the issue of the grid and then ask Thomas to pick up on the issue of planning and the engagement the ongoing engagement we have with the Department for Infrastructure. It's really important that investment is made in the grid in a cost-effective way, and as may have mentioned in the last answer, this is about costs we incur that get recovered over 40 years. So it's what's known as intergenerational debt. So the right costs need to be incurred now to ensure we can deliver the renewable energy future, cognizant of the fact that we actually have that we will be paying for it for a long time. There is very, very helpfully really good ongoing engagement between NIE Networks, who obviously own and run the monopoly distribution electricity network, and it is subject to intense regulatory scrutiny. So the conversation between the utility regulator and NIE has looked to ensure that the grid is fit for purpose and investment can be brought forward during the decade between now and 2030 to ensure that we can bring forward and accelerate electrification, for example, for electric vehicles and for heat pumps that has been mentioned already. So to try and give you some comfort, there's really good engagement ongoing between the network monopoly, NIE Networks, and the utility regulator. And another aspect that they're looking at, the potential for review, is on connection charges. And again, you're probably aware we've had feedback as well about, we need fair connection charges, and that maybe the current policy isn't fair, so that is being reviewed as well. If I asked Thomas then just to mention what the really big issue of planning policy, which will enable us to move faster towards renewable mix.
Yeah, thanks very much, Richard. And I think this highlights the importance of our approach thus far in making this an executive strategy that brings together multiple departments, because we can't be looking at these things in departmental silos. And the Department for Infrastructure, who obviously have responsibility for planning, have been heavily involved in the development of the strategy. Indeed, I think what's really important is that as we develop policies in this space, we do it together across government, rather than one doing it in one area and the other trying to play catch up. And that's why it's really important that as we've been looking at the renewable electricity target and how we meet that, we've had a power working group established, and the Department for Infrastructure planning team are part of that. So it means that the policies we're setting, DFI and the planning team there are fully aware of that. And indeed, what we've seen, you'll be aware fairly recently that DFI published a consultation on planning for the renewables growth in the future. So again, that's a really positive development and will help inform their approach in this area. I would maybe also just mention that on the grid side, obviously Richard's mentioned about the need to invest in the grid and to make sure that this can accommodate further renewables. I would also say one of the principles in the energy strategy is around creating a flexible and integrated energy system, of which the electricity grid will be an important part. And it's not just about investing in the grid, which is needed, but it's about how we can actually make better use of the grid and work smarter. And we can do that through things like smart technologies, through demand side response, through storage and things like that as well. So there's a number of aspects of this I think we'll be looking to take forward to help to deliver on that target.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate that, and I also appreciate the intention around working together, but is that actually happening now? Because certainly, when I've questioned the Minister for Infrastructure and I've put those responses then to the industry, they're saying that that's not what's happening on the ground. So, we can talk about working together, we can talk about strategies and move towards a target in 2030, but these issues are presenting themselves now, and given the technology around renewables, it's changing quite rapidly. So, by the time the departments or the executive get round to actually putting things into place, there's a good chance that they're already out of date. You know, and I'm even working on a constituency case right now where quite a significant business within my constituency's renewable energy source has been turned off and had been told that it will be 2 years before it can turn on again because of bureaucracy within NIE. So, you know, I appreciate what you're saying, I appreciate the intent, but on the ground this doesn't seem to be actually happening, and those actions don't really seem to be taken forward. So I'd be keen to hear you know, what's happening now, and let's stop working toward a target, because it feels like we're always doing that rather than actually getting things done.
I would just quickly answer that to say that yes, it is happening now, and we had an example in recent times about planning over battery storage, where there was good collaboration between ourselves and the Department for Infrastructure. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. It's something that we've got to continue to work on, change the habits of the past. So, you know, your challenge about the fact that it doesn't seem to be happening fast enough, we understand, and we all need to redouble our efforts.
John?
Thank you, and thank you for your presentations thus far. I noticed a story on RTE this morning that the regulator there is warning that there could be supply shortfalls in the southern market over the next 5 years as a result of an increase in demand on electricity. It may also be as a result of poor planning on their behalf in terms of infrastructure and energy provision. But what is the estimated increase or potential demand on electricity demand in the time ahead in the next 5 years? But what's the potential increase of demand? And are we confident that we are able to meet that demand?
Sorry.
Yeah.
No. Sorry. You know, I'll start to pick up the answer to that of what is a very challenging question. Yeah. Today, EirGrid and Sony issued their annual look forward, their capacity statement, and that's something they're obliged to do by the regulations both in Northern Ireland here and down south. And so that landed this morning, and you're absolutely right. You know, you can see the pressures, particularly that are building up down south on the development, driven by two things. The development of significant load increase through data centres, where there are now, I think the figure I read was 67 data centres. Some of them are quite large, and many of those data centres haven't come with the energy supply. And so that's putting pressure on the electricity capacity. And secondly, there is a retirement of some significant fossil fuel plant down there, including the peat generator, which is, you know, putting the pressure on the supply side. That has a small impact on us at the moment, in as much as sometimes we might want to import electricity through the north-south interconnector, and it might not be there. But we've also got the resilience of the east-west interconnector from Wales across to Ireland, and also the Moyle interconnector from Scotland into Northern Ireland. It's all about a balance. You asked the question about growth in Northern Ireland. We would start by saying energy efficiency first will mean that there'll be a reduction to some degree of electricity demand along the way, but also there'll be an increase in demand due to electric vehicles, which will be driven by the motor manufacturers. And we can already see that starting to happen now more readily on the streets, and also through heat pump technology and the electrification of heat. So there will be growth, and certainly one of the interesting things is that the target now, which was out in the options consultation, that was very well supported, 70% renewable electricity by 2030, will require at least 1,000 megawatts of new renewable electricity capacity. We are, as a member will know, leaders in renewable electricity at the moment, and that's despite not having any renewable electricity support for the past 5 years. And where around 45% of our demand is from renewable, is satisfied by renewable electricity sources. That leads us also to being leaders in curtailment, so switching off wind turbines whenever the demand isn't there, especially overnight. And that's where the balance system we talked about and getting involved with the hydrogen production is quite interesting, because it's potentially a storage of energy rather than just switching off the wind turbine, making it useful. But as we grow the capacity to get to 70%, well, then there's a risk of additional curtailment and additional redundancy, and that's where the balance system is going to be really important. So I think to answer your question in the round, we would expect that by achieving the 70% by 2030 through renewable electricity, we'll meet and more than meet the increased demand, but also be able to test quickly. The balance system have been able to use both battery storage and hydrogen storage to effectively keep the lights on. And I think it's really important because that's where the reports go to this morning. The first and most important thing is to keep the lights on. The second and most important thing is that it needs to be affordable, people can pay. And the third most important thing is that we ultimately get the decarbonisation of the whole energy mix.
Okay, which leads you on to my next question. The report about EirGrid is interesting and it has to be taken seriously, but it also could be seen as those who have interests in fossil fuel are the winners out of that, because the fossil fuel centres have to either be kept open or reopened, and there's also then a concern spread among the public that renewable energy is not reliable, that we're not ready for it, that it doesn't give security of supply. Which brings me to the report published by the PAC last week, and the recommendation 4, and I'll just quote the prelude to that. The committee recognises and accepts that there will continue to be a need to seek assistance from and place reliance on specialist consultants and other industry experts. However, there needs to be an awareness that some submissions will come from organisations with vested interests, and these need to be treated with an appropriate level of professional scepticism. End of quote. In terms of the consultation responses you've had to your energy strategy and the recommendation which follows from that quote I've just given, it's quite clear that there needs to be scepticism, or certainly a level of detailed scrutiny of submissions from those who are stakeholders in this game. Energy production is a hugely profitable industry to be involved in, and there are major stakeholders and players in this who may be reluctant to change or see that they may lose out as a result of change and a move to renewables. What is the department doing to ensure that those with powerful voices aren't setting the agenda?
I'll start and I'll let Thomas explain maybe subsequent to that. We can only agree with the recommendation 4. We have to approach the issue of vested interest very, very carefully. And we're acutely aware of that, and we have been acutely aware of that since we started in this journey 2 years ago. We need the right balance. We're going to need the investment. The Committee for Climate Change in its 6th carbon budget and the balanced pathway for Northern Ireland looking forward to 2050 to get the net zero carbon suggests that by 2030 we're going to have to be investing annually around £1.3 billion. And of that £1.3 billion, maybe 25% of it will come from the public sector. But the balance has to be found from the private sector. But what is clear is consumers pay for it all, and it's fundamentally important that that's done in the correct way. So what we have in Ireland as a whole, in the island market, and what you referred to there is the single electricity market. The single electricity market keeps the lights on, and keeps the lights on hopefully at the most affordable price. It runs the capacity auctions to ensure that we can keep the lights on, and it provides a daily dynamic to ensure that we pay the least possible price. But what is clear is that when the wind blows, prices tend to be lower, and when the wind doesn't blow, prices tend to be higher. And that's a factor of the fact that the backup fuel is either at the moment in Northern Ireland, either coal or natural gas. And those prices that we talked about earlier have risen dramatically. But on the plus side, when the wind blows, the marginal cost of producing electricity with wind is close to zero, because the wind itself is a free fuel, and it's all about the capital that has been invested. And so, yes, coming back to the PAC report, we've accepted the recommendations. The narrow renewable obligation has been a success in getting us into the 40% of renewable electricity, and we're going to need We're going to need some degree of support going forward to get to the 2030 target. And come back to the specific question that you asked. We have to be very wary of the vested interests, and we have to have the expertise in the department, and we've been building up that expertise especially over the last couple of years, and learned the lessons, for example, of RHI. And we will ensure that the engagement that we do with the industry, we understand the potential for vested interests, as you put it, taking us down in the wrong direction. We're acutely aware of that. Anything more you want to add, Thomas?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I suppose just a couple of things. Firstly, our approach to this has really been based around two things. One is evidence, and we launched the energy strategy with a call for evidence to get that point across. And secondly, about making sure that this is informed by everyone, not just a small group of vested interests. The call for evidence, we got 161 responses for that. Over half the responses didn't come from the energy industry. So that gave us a really strong, broad range of evidence to look at in developing the energy strategy. The working groups that we set up to analyse, review and help to inform further evidence on those responses has over 70 individuals from over 30 organisations represented on them. So again, a very broad cross-section of interests to provide evidence, which ultimately is for government and the department to review. And again, the consultation, we've seen the efforts that we made to reach way beyond the energy industry and get the views and opinions of people that wouldn't normally respond to these type of things. And again, over half the responses we're getting to that is coming from consumers and what they want and what works for them. So that all helps to shape the energy strategy and make sure that what we're putting forward in it reflects the views and evidence that we've received from across the piece and not just from a very small group.
Okay, just a comment more than a question. I'm not necessarily just simply talking about those involved in the single electricity market. Obviously, there's also a lobby within the renewable sector who will have ideas and agendas, and some of those will have unintended consequences. But I note these are taking the recommendation 4 seriously, because I think it is vital that the vested interest issues are examined very, very closely. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Not least, I suppose, it's been interesting was to see the various backdrops that all of you have in terms of, I suppose, all of us are slightly wondering whose guitar that is. But look, a number of the other committee members have, I suppose, probed some of the areas I was looking at, but I suppose, therefore, I'll try and keep my remarks fairly succinct. Mention was made earlier on about the legislative framework not being fit for purpose, and I appreciate we are probably a few weeks away from the publication of the final strategy. I'm just wondering, in terms of giving a little bit of insight into that, is that strategy likely simply to also flag up that the legislative framework needs reform, or is that likely to contain specific proposals in terms of how the legislative framework should change? Would be the first question that I have.
Yeah, thank you. I'll comment on that. What I would say is legislation has been identified as one of the key priorities for us to deliver on this strategy. We understand there's a major programme of work to be taken forward on the legislative base, and when we come forward with an action plan then following the strategy, that will be part of that. One thing I would say about legislation is legislation follows policy. So you've got to understand what you're trying to achieve, what you want to achieve, and then the legislative base follows that. So that's why what's in the strategy and the direction of travel is really important. Developing the policy is really important, and then making sure the legislation follows that. And as I say, there will be a major work programme to deliver on that flowing from the strategy.
So yeah, from that point of view,
and if I could just qualify the statement about fit for purpose. I mean, it's fit for purpose for the electricity and gas industry as today. It doesn't address the heat and oil industry, and it certainly doesn't address the challenge of renewable energy going forward, and that's what the key things that need to be addressed.
No, I suppose the issue about it being to some extent incomplete. I suppose to pick up the other point, which I know a number of members have picked up on, which is the importance of collaboration, which is very much at the heart of what you have planned. And again, through experience with government, I suppose there's two bits. Maybe I'll ask them sort of simultaneously. I note, for instance, you've got the cross-departmental working group, the project team. I think you indicated you've had 9 meetings of that. But again, sometimes can be I suppose, quite often see where collaboration is required. Within various strands of government at times, there can be two areas where things fall down on. first of all, that you get a situation where either on the one hand, the lead department will be very committed to this, trying to achieve particular objectives, but to some extent it's seen as quite a secondary issue for other departments. And therefore there can be a frustration in government sometimes that whatever the lead department wants to do, it can then find external factors coming in effectively and blocking it. So I suppose the first element is to what extent, and I know Claire earlier on, for instance, touched on the issue of planning, to take one example, to what extent will the delivery of the energy strategy be dependent upon the input directly from other departments, or to what extent can it really be driven from economy? And I suppose the second fallback, which again Claire touched on, again the experience is that quite often it's relatively easy to get people at the centre of departments round the same table, agreeing the same strategic objectives, but quite often where it falls apart will be what the delivery on the ground is, that the practitioners on the ground aren't necessarily operating with the same level of collaboration or urgency within that. So are you developing mechanisms to try to make sure that you can sustain that push for delivery on the ground, and indeed a level of monitoring of that to make sure it happens? Because we've seen it happen on a number of things, I think most notably at times in the past on, say, some of the issues around children's cooperation side of things, where there's been a drive, there's been acceptance at that level at top, but whenever sometimes the practitioners trying to the jigsaw together at the bottom are not quite operating on the same page as maybe those at the upper echelons of government policy.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you've touched on two really important issues for the strategy and for delivery here. The first really about buy-in and making sure that it has appropriate support across the executive. And I think our approach thus far has made sure that the officials from many, many departments are very, very closely and heavily involved in the development and drafting of the strategy. I think that's why it's really important that it's not a DFE strategy, it's an executive strategy that all ministers sign up to. I think that will drive then the support and buy-in across the executive, making sure that it isn't primary for one department and secondary for another. It's a priority for the executive. I think the delivery one's really important. We've a really good basis to work from because we've developed a strategy together. It makes it much easier to deliver it together, but we can't just rest on our laurels and see what happens off the back of that.
Just on that,
and that's why I mentioned we have developed a programme board, and we've already had the first meeting of that, and that brings together senior representatives from across the departments who are responsible for various different bits of energy policy. And the job of that group will be to oversee the delivery of the action plan, which is about delivery, it is about what happens on the ground, and it's about collective responsibility and ownership to drive that forward.
Is there any, just going to ask in terms of that, is in terms of then delivery of the strategy, either from within the executive or beyond that, is it likely then to have some component of external monitoring? Because I note, maybe to take one example on it, whenever a few months ago the independent or the expert panel on education under achievement produced its report, obviously, for instance, the bulk of its recommendations were around delivery within the education sector, which either the Department of Education or the Education Authority or schools or indeed a range of other organisations were essentially delivering on. They had as one of their recommendations that there be sort of a monitoring report that would be produced, for instance, by TEO. So to some extent, if you like, you had an external body marking the homework in terms of delivery. And I'm just wondering, has there been any consideration to any form of external monitoring of how the strategy rolls out, or would that again simply be envisaged as being something that's in-house within the expertise of economy?
If I could come in there, I mean, that is quite a philosophical question that you ask. I mean, effectively,
Father Ted, but far away.
No, I mean, effectively what you're asking is, this is an executive strategy, so who's going to hold the executive to account for the delivery on the strategy? And I think at this point in time, we do not intend to appoint someone external to monitor delivery. We have, on the other hand, had significant external advice through the appointed external advisory panel in the development of the strategy, and it may well be that the concept of external advisors to monitor the delivery of the strategy may well be taken forward. We haven't finally decided on that yet, but certainly it's the executive's responsibility to ensure that the energy strategy, which is part of the sits underneath the umbrella strategy of the green growth strategy, which is the overall climate change strategy, is actually delivered.
I guess the point I was making was it's maybe not, I mean, one route of that could be something that is external to government, but I suppose the issue is whether there's any level of monitoring, if effectively, although it's an executive strategy, DFE is the principal driver of this over the next number of years. I suppose the issue whether there's a internal even mechanism within the executive, and as I said, to take the example on the underachievement side of it, it's not necessarily that there is any additional external support that's being brought in to monitor, but that it was the monitoring of what was happening across the bit was then going to be put under the ambit of TEO, for instance, on that basis. So it doesn't necessarily, I mean, I think we're all aware sometimes of the slight degree of, particularly from a cost point of view, of the dangers of just another layer of external consultants looking at things on it. But I suppose it's trying to make sure that there is something which then operates, if this is something that the whole executive is supposed to be bought into, and something which will sustain beyond individual ministers, individual sort of remits in that regard. I suppose it's the issue to what extent we can get something which ensures there is that drive throughout the executive.
And I think that's a very fair point. I suppose one thing I would say is we want to be as transparent as possible. And that's why we want to commit to producing annual reports on the strategy and how it's progressing, to allow that insight and that challenge in terms of how we're doing on delivering against this. I think it's important that we don't see this as entirely separate from the work that DERA are leading on green growth and on climate action. And obviously there will be structures put in place to monitor and report on that, of which energy strategy is around 60% of emissions and will of course feed into that. But I think the very fair point's made, and perhaps something that we take away and consider and speak to our colleagues across government in terms of the monitoring of this going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, guys. There's no one further.
Mike?
Oh, sorry, Mike.
Oh, Chair.
Sorry. Apologies.
No, not a problem. Maeve, Thomas and Richard, thanks for your engagement with the committee. I think if we can agree that we broadly have an understanding of the journey we want to undertake and the destination we want to reach, then we might also agree that the main tools that we need to undertake the journey are policy, planning, and the grid stroke storage. So my question is, what are the pinch points? What are the areas that give you most concern?
I'll maybe start by saying all of the above. As the member says, this is a very complex area, and we've done our best to slice it and dice it in a way that is understandable more widely, and we're able to talk to the various entities right across government who will be responsible for the delivery of the various parts to come together to what is effectively net zero. And I think you've captured it quite well there, that it's all about policy planning and the enabling infrastructure. Thomas, is it, what keeps you awake at night?
So yeah, I mean, I guess one of the important things here, I think, for us as we take this forward is it's going to need very significant investment. And we know that investment will pay off. It will deliver against decarbonisation and it will deliver against affordability. But we need to do this in a way that is cost effective, that is value for money, and that is distributed right across the various different groups. And I suppose there are the challenges. If money and value for money is no object, we can do anything at any time, but it is a really important part of this. And so I guess it's that trajectory, it's how we identify the cost-effective trajectory, the way forward, the most clever ways to set up the policies and supports that will be needed to do it. And I think that's why this is an ongoing process to not only understand the direction of travel and where we want to get to, but actually what's the detail of the policies that we need to set up and continue to develop those over a period of time to really refine them and get them right.
Well, I would actually add a further to the policy planning grid and cash, and that's back to the communication aspect. What we are talking about here, it's a strategy. Lots of people agree with what we're doing at a high level in that strategy. They want to see action, they want leadership, they want net zero, they want that climate for future generations. There's no argument really across all of that. But what we're really talking about when we deliver the strategy is changes to people's lives. And at the moment, I think an awful lot of people, and we get this feedback from consumers even recently in the workshops and engagement we've had, people see action on climate as something that they'll watch from the sidelines. So there's something of an audience to changes that are coming. We will, as government, we have to do the heavy lifting. We have to put the infrastructure in place. We have to ensure that the policies are there and ready for people, that the advice is ready for people to access, and it's advice and information that they can easily find no matter where they live. But at the end of the day, it will mean changes to people's lives, to how they travel around, how they get to work, whether they go to work in some cases, or whether they sit at home, as we all are, and their homes. And I think this is where we're going to face our biggest communications challenge. People are very comfortable in their homes, and if they have a nice home, they don't necessarily want to see floors taken up or new pipes put in. And these are the changes we're talking about. It's actual real changes to people's homes. So I would add communication and awareness raising and buy-in with right across the general public. That's domestic consumers, it's businesses and beyond.
That's very useful, thank you. And I agree, I think buy-in is very important. And perhaps that's where John O'Dowd's micro-generation bill comes in that it makes people players rather than spectators.
It's one of the areas that we know that people can potentially be part of. What we do believe and what we find, I suppose, in terms of consultation engagement so far, is that there are some people who want to become actively engaged in this energy transition. They're excited about it. They maybe already have an electric vehicle. They're looking at storage. There's some exciting work already happening in Northern Ireland where people can become active players in the energy market. And when people have the technology in their homes, that can allow them to see the energy that they're using on a perhaps half-hourly basis. Then they'll become more aware and they might get more interested. But that won't be for everyone at the same time. There's already an awful lot of people who don't even open their electricity bills when they arrive. So we have to be prepared for the full spectrum, for those who are engaged, who want to become engaged and who are excited by the changes that are coming, and those who simply won't care very much and just won't want to see significant disruption and won't want to have too much cost in their lives. So it's trying to accommodate that full spectrum of consumers.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for your information so far. My question relates to a point that Claire had raised regarding connection charges, and it was obviously discussed yesterday at John's bill, as we referred at this stage. And Richard, you referred to you're doing a policy review on connection charges. What's the timeline and all that, and at what point will then it become affordable for people to do more connections to the grid for whatever reason, whether it be renewables or new buildings or the industry, etc. So how long is that review going to take, and what's it going to mean at the end of it, and how do you take the monopoly away from who currently has it?
So just to address the question directly, the initial conversation and the ongoing conversation is between NIE Networks and the utility regulator. The department, of course, is very interested because it's about the policy framework inside the legislative framework. So, for example, the natural gas connection policy is different to the electricity connection policy. And maybe there are some lessons that can be learned from the gas connection policy in terms of how costs are shared. And that is part of what you're referring to. You've talked about whether, you've mentioned also about taking, the monopoly away. Well, there is competition in connections across in GB. And quite frankly, there are many, many instances that it doesn't work and consumers end up paying more. Having the regulatory scrutiny and having the right policy in place is probably the most important thing. So certainly from our perspective in the department, we're very interested and very keen on seeing the outcome of the active conversation between NIE Networks and the utility regulator to ensure that we can facilitate properly the growth in the network and connections to the network, especially when we're going to need more connections, all relating to the development of renewable solutions, particularly, for example, in EV charging and heat pumps and wind connections and solar connections and so on. So we recognise the need for reform, and we're very much engaged in helping the conversation along between the utility regulator and NIE.
So Richard, who ultimately has the power in that? Let's call it, there's a two-way conversation and there's a three-way conversation. Who has the power to ultimately drive down connection charges? Is that?
That's a decision. That's a decision for the utility regulator. But they may come to the department for some comfort in terms of how that there may, if they decide there needs to be some reform, and in advance of any legislative reform, then they may come to the department for some advice and comfort. So, it is a three-way conversation, but it's primarily a decision for the utility regulator at this time.
At what point, and you may not know the answer to this to be fair, but at what point do you see the utility regulator come into the department? Because we assume they're going to come and say it's too costly for connection charges. So have you any guesstimated timeline on that, do you think, or will that happen?
Well, it's a live conversation is all I could say. So sooner rather than later.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Richard, and everyone else. Thanks.
John, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just following on Keith's point. Richard, as part of the energy strategy, will the department be making any recommendations in relation to connection charges, or calling on the regulator or to do something, or suggesting that further legislation is required to deal with this issue?
Thomas, you keep me right in this. Specifically, no, but it could, it's not specifically something that needs addressed in detail in the energy strategy. Like I mentioned a moment ago, it can be tackled now under the existing regulatory policy.
No, Richard, you're absolutely right. It's a really important issue. For the strategy, it's not specifically covered in that, because it's part of one of the many things that we need to do to meet that 70%, at least 70% target. So it's not something we'll dwell on in the strategy itself, but it will be a really important part of what we're doing at the moment and following the strategy as well.
And will it be tackled?
I think the simple answer is yes.
Okay, I like simple answers.
I just have two quick questions I wanted to pick up on, and they came from Peter's questions, just around the role of the one-stop shop. Do you see that as having an advisory role to the department, to the executive in relation to energy going forward? And do you see it being along the lines of the SEAI in the south? And then the second question is around the kind of the legislation and the legislative framework in energy in general, but specifically in terms of the obligations of the utility regulator, and one of them still remains to promote the development of the gas industry. And certainly in my own view, I don't think that's particularly appropriate at this point, given all of the issues in relation to gas prices, but also in terms of giving them a specific duty to promote decarbonisation. Are those things that can be done in the immediacy, or is those things also going to have to, be part of that, what you described as a couple of years to get the type of legislation in place that is needed?
If I could ask Thomas to address the first question, and I'll come back about the promotion of the gas industry point, if that's okay. Yeah.
No, thanks, Richard. And as I said, the proposals we put forward for the one-stop shop and the consultation were really strongly supported by almost 90% of respondents to it. In our engagement with consumers, we've seen the types of things that they need, that information, awareness and support, and the benefits that doing that through a one-stop shop, one person you go to speak about these things, that is impartial, that you can trust, and how important that'll be for driving forward the energy transition. So I think primarily the focus of a one-stop shop would be for consumers, because that's really where the big task is in driving some of the behavioural change that Maeve talked about. You mentioned the SEAI. It is a really good best practice model of what can be done in this space. But when we reviewed a number of those, we've looked at SEAI, but there's also some really good things that are happening across in England, Scotland and Wales as well. and various different organisations happy that happened there. So there are good examples out there that we can lift from here in Northern Ireland on that front.
And then turning to the natural gas question, I mean, starting with prices, the price impacts this winter we talked about at the beginning of this session are really concerning. And it's not just a natural gas challenge, it's a natural gas and a heating oil challenge. And I mentioned the terrible 70% year-on-year increase in heating oil prices, and that sits alongside the 35 and 22% increases in natural gas. This is not good for consumers, especially lower-income consumers this winter. In terms of promoting the gas industry, what is clear, the facts, and Thomas talked about evidence-based. When someone switches from an inefficient heating oil boiler to a modern natural gas system, they reduce their carbon footprint by the best part of 50%. So it's on the decarbonisation pathway. Of course, natural gas is still a fossil fuel. What this summer has told us is that when the wind doesn't blow, then we need to be able to produce electricity from a thermal plant. So it's likely, one of the big challenges that has been experienced across Europe, especially in Germany, is that peak electricity demand tends to happen on a January day when it's dark and it's cold. And if that happens to coincide with what the Germans call Dunkelflaute, i.e. there is no wind, then there is a challenge of keeping the lights on. And as we said at the beginning, keeping the lights on is the first priority. Affordability is the second priority, and decarbonisation is the third priority. At the moment, in the balanced pathway, there is a position for a decarbonised gas, providing the storage or keeping the lights on. So whenever the wind is blowing, we can store electricity in batteries, but that tends to be short term, or we can store the energy in gas by converting the electricity to gas, a decarbonised gas, which is where green hydrogen comes in. So in principle, the continued development of the gas industry is on the pathway, but it will only remain on the pathway providing that moves to decarbonised gas, that is gas without the carbon. And that's where the latest kind of thinking with the Committee for Climate Change and others is the concept of a hybrid heat pump, where most homes would provide their base load from electricity, and then whenever the electricity demand is there and the wind isn't there, they would provide it with decarbonised gas. So one of the potential pathways to the future is that the gas system will be there for storage, less gas will be used, but it'll be there to support and keep the lights on and keep homes warm whenever the wind doesn't blow. Now, obviously, if we don't get to the point of having enough decarbonised gas, then the answer will be slightly different to that. But as things stand at the moment, it is the right thing to continue to see the development of the gas industry because it supports the decarbonisation pathway.
And then just specifically, Richard, on the legislation that's required, and my opinion would be required to be specific in relation to decarbonised gas, if that is the way that is being put forward by the department, but also in relation to giving the utility regulator an obligation in terms of decarbonisation, because the decisions that are being taken now by the utility regulator in terms also of investment in infrastructure are based on the obligations that they currently have, and it's not fit for purpose in terms of moving towards net zero.
And the point that you make is really important, and look forward to coming back to the committee sooner rather than later to talk about the legislative changes that are needed to support decarbonisation across the energy mix, across the integrated energy system on power, heat and transport.
Okay, thank you. Look, I think that's everything for today, so we will look forward to having you back hopefully at the end of October or beginning of November in relation to the publication of the strategy. So thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I don't know if we have anything to...
Chair, we are looking at scheduling in both the Utility Regulator and the Consumer Council, because as has been pointed out by a number of members, they will have a role going forward in this. and it would be useful to hear their views and the conversations they're already having with the department. So we're trying to schedule those in, preferably before we get the department coming back with their final options for the executive. That will mean in the next number of weeks.
Okay. No, that's dead on. Okay, members, so we'll move on to our next briefing on October monitoring. And it's item number 5 in your packs. There's a clerk's memo at page 118, and then a copy of the departmental briefing papers on October monitoring at page 121. And I think our officials are there, although Malcolm looks, or David looks a bit.
There
we go. So if I could welcome to the meeting David Malcolm, Head of Management Services and Regulation in DFE, Joanna Park, Accountant in Financial Management Branch, and Niamh McGarvey, who's an Accountant in Financial Management Branch. And if I hand over to yourselves to make an opening statement, and then we'll open it up to members. Oh, I think David might be on mute. David, can you hear us? We can't hear you.
Hang on, I think there's a fix for this. Bear with me.
He's got headphones, so
it's the headphone. It is. It's the headphone.
If he logs out and logs back in, does that
I have
fix
a
it?
fix. Oh, gone. I did have a fix for this somewhere. I think he takes it off.
Yeah, David, we think that if you log out and log back in with the headphones on or off?
The headphones off. The headphones are known to interfere with the Starleaf system, and this has happened in the past.
We're familiar with it.
Yeah, we've definitely had this in the past. So it's a case of not using the headphones and re-logging in, and maybe if we proceeded with Joanna and Niamh in the meantime.
Yes, that's no problem. I can deliver the opening statement.
Great. If you want to go ahead, Joanna, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'm joined by my colleagues David Malcolm and Niamh McGarvey to brief members on October monitoring. The paper members have in front of them this morning sets out my department's response to the October monitoring exercise. As members will be aware, the monitoring exercise, which typically occurs 3 times a year, allows departments to realign its budget allocation on the basis of emerging needs. Departments can reallocate non-ring-fence budgets to meet emerging pressures without recourse to DOF, which allows departments to be more responsive in addressing emerging pressures. The paper sets out the reduced requirements, budget pressures, reallocations that have been made, and bids for additional funding. I will briefly summarise the headline figures, rounded to the nearest £1 million. DFE has reallocated £7 million of non-ring-fenced resource DEL budget against inescapable pressures of £8 million. This has resulted in a £1 million overcommitment. However, this is manageable within the overall departmental position. DFE will submit 3 bids to the Department of Finance. 150,000 non-ring-fenced resource DEL to meet construction and procurement delivery fees for City Deal projects. 59,000 non-ring-fenced resource DEL to meet additional first-year costs associated with the Graduate Entry Medical School. And 7.1 million ring-fenced resource DEL for depreciation, impairment pressures, charges in further education colleges. DFE will also submit 3 ring-fenced resource DEL reduced requirements to the Department of Finance, 3.3 million for the COVID restriction business support scheme, 2.7 million for Invest NI, NIO, international trade and exports funding, and 0.1 million for consolidated fund extra receipts for the Insolvency Services unclaimed dividends. DFE has 276 million ring-fenced resource DEL funding for the Economic Recovery Action Plan, 130.8 million for economic support measures,
and 145 million for the high street support. DFE is proposing to hold 21 million of unallocated funding from the Economic Recovery Action Plan to protect against a potential overrun in the high street scheme due to uncertainty in population estimates and uptake. Options will be explored to reallocate or surrender at January monitoring if required, when there will be more certainty about actual cost of the high street scheme. Moving on to capital, DFE started October monitoring with 14.2 million unallocated capital DEL. Internal reduced requirements of 3.3 million were identified in October monitoring and offset against bids of 1.5 million, leaving an unallocated budget of 16 million. As set out in the paper, there are a number of emerging capital pressures which are being kept under review. There is a 0.5 million ring-fenced financial transaction capital reduced requirement to DOF relating to Invest NI financial transaction capital receipts. The paper presented to the committee referred to these as a capital transaction, but it is an FTC transaction following a recent budget classification change by the Department of Finance. This change has no impact on DFE's ability to retain the receipts. Chair, that is a quick summary of October monitoring. David, Neve and I will do our best to answer any questions members might have and provide additional clarification. Where we cannot give you precise or complete answers on issues, we will be happy to write to the clerk to provide the necessary explanations. Where a question is specific to a business area, we will ask our policy colleagues to provide a response. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna. And I just have a couple of quick questions to start with. First of all, I see in relation to the 16 million unallocated capital DEL and emerging capital pressures, does that money have to be used within this financial year, and are those emerging capital pressures likely to be within this financial year?
Yes, Chair, the emerging capital pressures are likely to be in this financial year, and it's anticipated that the unallocated capital will be fully utilised, so it should not be surrendered at this stage.
And then, and I'm not being funny here, so give me a bit of leeway, but the 59,000 for additional first year costs for the medical school seems like a very small bid. Is there a reason why it's been made?
It's made because of the obviously there will be additional running costs of the graduate entry medical school, and we did have an allocation to our department and ring fence funding as part of June monitoring, and this is just a little bit extra of the ring fence funding that we need in order for the running costs of that facility.
Okay, so it's ring fenced, and that's why the bid
is
ring
fenced, yes.
And then there is a reduced requirement, the 2.7 million for international trade and exports. Just wondering why that's a reduced requirement.
Yes, Chair, that is because the Invest NI's trade and exports international expansion has been unable to proceed as quickly as originally anticipated, primarily due to the continuing pandemic restrictions globally and due to difficulties with recruitment. As a result, Invest NI has requested an extension of the scheme into a third year. They're not requesting additional funding, they're just requesting longer from the Northern Ireland office to deliver the programme, and negotiations are ongoing with Treasury to see whether that can be expanded into the third year.
And in the case that it is granted that it can be extended into the third year, will then a bid have to be made?
It would be if they decide to do it into the third year, we'll be able to issue a revised profile, which would leave the total at the 8 million, which is what they have already secured, and allow them to spend an additional 4.1 next year and then 3.5 the following year, which would bring them up to their 8 million.
Okay, so we can get an update on that at a later date.
Yes.
Chair, thank you. Joanna, just two points. It was my understanding that the margin for error in the High Street voucher scheme was in the order of 4 to 5 million. So I'm puzzled that you're holding back 21. And the other thing is the 7.1 million bid for depreciation in FE colleges. I mean, depreciation is something you see coming a long way out. So how come you're bidding for such a large amount in a monitoring round?
Okay, I'll deal with the depreciation first, if that's okay. This is a historic pressure. Our baseline has not been looked at in regards to depreciation for a number of years, and this was a historic change to do with an accounting treatment, and DOF are aware this is a pressure that emerges with us every year, and as part of June monitoring we had a bid in for 10.9 million and only 4.4 of that was met. So we have the pressure then gets carried into the next monitoring round. We do always anticipate that this will be met, but it is dependent upon release of depreciation non-cash DEL from other departments. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. It's a bit technical.
So it's basically a historic problem, and our baseline hasn't been reinstated to deal with it. But going forward with the spending review, we would anticipate that should remove that need and that our baseline would be reinstated.
Okay, yeah, I've got that. Okay. And the High Street voucher?
The High Street voucher is to do with the population figures. So the population, the most recent population figures from NISRA were closer to 1.5 million, and there will obviously need to be some modelling around changes to that. And then there obviously with an increase in population and uptick, that's the potential for 10 million, and then there is obviously the potential for those to be higher, and then there's obviously related contract costs in respect of this. So it is just a contingency to ensure that funds would be there if uptake does hit maximum level.
Well, colleagues will keep me right here, but we had a briefing from officials on the scheme, and I formed a clear impression the margin of error was, I say, 4 to 5 million, not 21. Anybody disagree?
There will always be a margin of error, but obviously from a budgeting perspective, to ensure that we have the contingency to meet the full demand, that requires us to hold upwards on the 21 million, upwards on 20 million really, to meet if it reached maximum capacity. The 4 to 5 million is based on projections around I think it's 5% of the population not taking it up and 2% of balances being on cards. But from a budgeting perspective, in order to be prudent and to ensure that the funding is there, we have set that aside, that if it did reach maximum capacity.
So we can query the additional contract charges with the policy area in relation.
Area later today. Yeah.
Okay, so just final point then, Joanna. Okay, so you've explained where the 4 to 5 comes from. Let's say it is 5 million. That leaves, 16 million? What happens to that money?
Our policy officials are exploring the potential to introduce additional economic recovery interventions should the full 21 million not be required for the High Street scheme.
Okay, thank you.
John?
Oh, thank you. I note there's £3.3 million of business support that was ring-fenced for COVID restrictions, business support being handed back, which will come as a bit of a blow to those businesses who were looking at schemes expanded at various stages and who were looking support. But the point I want to get to is, and just let me just scroll across my notes, is the department's handing back total internal resource DEL and ring fence reduced requirements of around 3.1 million. Is that right?
Yes, 3.3 million of the COVID restrictions business support scheme, and then 2 smaller amounts.
Sorry, I'm looking at Appendix 1 in the document you've sent us.
Yeah.
Table 1, DEL, non-ring fence reduced requirements.
Appendix 1 are their internal reduced requirements,
right, yes,
that we then reallocate to meet the pressures that we have outlined in Appendix 2.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but there's around a third of that, if I'm reading this chart properly, is in relation to apprenticeships, careers and vocational education.
Yes.
Why is there what appears to be quite a significant underspend in that area?
In the apprenticeships one, that is a non-recurrent reduction in the apprenticeships NI, and that's a result of additional European Social Fund being available in the current financial year. So it's not actually an underspend or work as such, it's just being funded from a different source.
All right, so okay, that answers that query. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I don't have any other members looking to come in, Joanna, so that's us for today.
That's great. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, members, so we don't have the Minister until 25 or to half past.
Let us know as soon as they arrive.
So if we move on and start to do...
Sure, can I just ask one query, just following up on Mike's? What's the total budget for the
High Street Voucher?
Scheme?
Oh, for the High Street Voucher?
Yeah.
145 million is what was allocated to it. Was that 145 million plus the 5 million from last year?
That was your margin of error. And essentially what it breaks down as the 145 is 140 for the vouchers based on a population of 1.4, which is 18 plus, and then the 5 million for admin costs. Now what the department has said is they are working on a wider margin of error because new NISRA estimates have suggested that population group is 1.5 million, and they've built in a further contingency because of population fluctuations that haven't been captured by any recent surveying by NISRA. But the additional administration costs seems to be very high.
It's 20 million holding back on a 140 million pound.
It's a lot of money.
Extremely high.
But that's definitely an issue that the Minister, I'm sure, will want to reassure members on. Because the worry would be is how long do you hold that money? Effectively, do you have to hold it till the end of November, till the scheme finishes? And then does that money then, can that money be recycled before the end of the financial year? Is it money that can be carried forward as part of economic recovery? Can it be rolled into a new financial year? There's a lot of questions there. It's a lot of money to be holding on to at this point in the financial year, considering the scheme goes until the end of November. I think definitely there need to be questions there.
A business case, a departmental business case, I think gives you flexibility. That's over 10% of a flexibility. I can't see a business case giving you that flexibility.
I think it's about 15%.
Yeah.
We see the ERAP funding. The department has full discretion over.
Yeah, that's if you like, it's crude, but that's an envelope stuffed full of cash that they can take money out of and put money back in as they don't use it. So any money associated with the scheme can be redeployed for other ERAP actions. But what maybe is the main concern is the time scale for that. So if that has to be held on to, will they start dispersing that money back into the ERAP
at the end of November? At
the end of November, or can they start doing it before, when they see what take-up is, when they see what kind of population response there is? That's the big concern.
Additional contract costs that I have a question mark over.
That's something to question, because we were kind of given the impression that the 5 million admin would cover everything. Sinead has a query.
Go ahead, Sinead.
Sorry, Chair, just asking, we were told at committee that administration costs were £5 million, and the total project, the total scheme was 149 million, including the 5 million admin. To kind of jump it up at this stage is a bit sneaky, to be fair, and I think we really need to understand why that there would be such a major shift from that 5 million admin cost, and why a business case that has just been developed in the last couple of weeks, months, in fact, really, probably the summer, that they wouldn't have factored in what the population was in Northern Ireland over 18 years old when they're developing a scheme specifically for them. Frankly, I think we need a few answers here.
Well, we have the Minister, so we can pick that up directly.
Paul is also part of that briefing, Chair. Paul Grocott, who is overall control. Claire wants to come in, Chair.
Could we ask our Minister or the Department as well in relation to this, if that is taken into account potential opportunities for fraud? Like, are they giving themselves an insurance with that? You know, where maybe they're paying out where they shouldn't be? And, you know, what safeguards have they put in place to ensure that that doesn't happen? I'm just conscious that even in press yesterday they talked about duplicate emails, but to me there's other reasons for that rather than potentially people trying to take the hand. But I think there is a big issue in relation to scams, which, you know, I intend to follow up with the Minister, but it might be worth asking what their safeguards are in place, because I would hate to think that they're setting aside this money because of error or potential error.
Yeah, well, we can raise
Chair, we'll ask for a breakdown, but as I say, the Minister and Paul may be able to clear up a lot of those issues. As is always the health warning with a monitoring round briefing, those officials don't necessarily have all of the background, so I think probably the Minister and Paul might be able to give a bit more insight, but we'll be putting in a request for detail on that money anyway, because it is a lot. It's, as I say, also the time scale of how long will it sit, can it be dispersed, when they see how things are going, when they see uptake and so on. I think that would be the concern, is to make sure it can be recycled if it's not used. But there is that flexibility because it sits within that ERAP pod.
It seems to be like, I mean, it is quite a large amount of money in relation to it. Maybe there's a range of elements to it, but part of it possibly also seems whether at some level within officials there's been, call it an ultra-conservative approach, that there's been you know, what is the absolute maximum? It does strike me as odd, I have to say, to suggest that there's that extent of a range of the population side of it, because one would have thought you could probably estimate the population relatively. You might be a few thousand out, or even given probably that, you know, a 10,000 or 20,000 out, but that would seem to be a pretty large contingency side of it. But whether it is, you know, somebody being ultra sort of belt and braces type of thing in relation to it, I don't know.
They're estimating around 200,000 out.
Yeah, it wouldn't be. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's aggregate elements of it, but yeah.
150,000 out.
Yeah, 150,000 out, which seems to me like extreme. But you know, in the same way, I suppose sometimes you get with sometimes the contracts that they'll build in a certain amount of that side of things. Maybe part of that is knowing that by putting that in, but it's still money that essentially can be reallocated within the department. Yeah. It may be less of a barrier, if you like, than if this was additional new money being sought type of thing.
Okay, so we'll move on and try to cover some of the matters arising. So if we go to 7.1 of our pack, page 262, there's a copy of correspondence from the Department for Infrastructure, DALO, regarding our request for an update on the provision of training for HGV drivers to mitigate the current shortage of qualified drivers. The DALO advises that many of the problems in recruitment are commercial in nature and will require improvements in pay and working conditions. EU exit is also a factor, as many EU drivers no longer live and work here or in Britain. The response states that DVA has taken a range of measures to maximise the availability of large goods vehicle driving test slots. The DALO advises that in the first 4 months since driving tests resumed on the 23rd of April, the DVA has conducted 1,290 LGV driving tests, which is 65% higher than the 5-year average for that period, demonstrating a clear commitment to providing increased testing capacity for the sector. So that is for members to note, and obviously we have also asked the Department for Economy about training opportunities. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a question on that. I understand the UK government had put in, I can't remember the figure, but additional money in the mainland. Is any Barnett consequence, any additional support here? And they also have changed in the mainland class 2 and class 1, so I think that you can do class 2 and jump straight into class 1 or thereabouts. Here that has not changed, and it would take a lot of pressure off, so it would be good to get clarity on that and why it's not been implemented here by the department of infrastructure.
We can ask those questions.
Chair, we write back and highlight those.
And the part about the class 2 licence, class 1.
Yeah.
Chair, just, I mean, to pick up from that point, if we're asking some questions around that, obviously know as well from a UK, and I appreciate these apply across the UK, but whether there's any indication from the department as to what impact, for instance, in terms of the change of temporary visas will have on the Northern Ireland market, if I can put it that way. I know the visa issue will be something that applies across the UK type of thing.
Moving on then to 7.2, page 57 of table papers, there's a copy of correspondence from the ERA Minister on behalf of himself and the Economy Minister to the Chair of the ERA Committee regarding labour shortages in the local port sector. The letter states the stakeholders have been clear that the British Government's new immigration policy is the main catalyst fuelling the emerging crisis in the food processing sector. Both the ERA and Economy Ministers have been engaging with the British Government on the issue and have set out a range of measures to alleviate the labour shortages, including relaxation of visa rules and expediting applications under the skilled worker route. The ERA Minister is indicating in this correspondence that there is an unwillingness from the British Government to address these issues. The Minister has requested a meeting with the British Prime Minister and Home Secretary on the issue, so that's for members to note at this stage, and we can be kept appraised of that.
We'll get an update, Chair.
Then 7.3 at page 61 of table papers, there's a response from FE colleges to the committee's request for views on HE Cheating Services Prohibition Bill. The colleges state that they would welcome legislation. At present, they do not have any experience or evidence of cheating services operating, and they have policies in place to respond to identify instances of cheating in assessments and ensure that students are made aware of the risks of using SE mills. So, as discussed at last week's meeting, the committee has received responses from a range of stakeholders now and is in a position to complete an LCM report should it be needed. However, recent indications from the department are that the bill may be significantly delayed. Go ahead, Lane.
Yeah, Chair, I'm just looking at the the Hansard record of our session on the High Street voucher, and John asked what the overspend was likely to be, and Tommy O'Reilly said we're not expecting it's going to be anything significant. It could be in the region of £2 to £3 million, and that was based on 1.5 million, so they'd already upgraded from 1.4. So they've gone from 2 to 3 to 21.
We will ask the Minister when he comes in. So, moving on then, item number 8, the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Bill. There's a copy of admissibility criteria for amendments to a bill at page 266, and then a copy of the Hansard from the Human Rights Commission's briefing on the bill last week at page 267. So
Chair,
that's just for members, sorry.
Chair, I've also emailed members the issues table. You may recall we talked about this as being a key process of looking at a bill and getting responses from the department. So that should be fairly close to the top of members' email inbox, and the department will come back with those responses, and the committee hopefully will have an opportunity then to look at those in the next couple of weeks. It really just it puts on paper all of the issues that have been raised with us and how the department suggests they have considered or dealt with it and so on. So just to give members an idea of what to expect. Thanks, Chair.
So those items are for members to note, and obviously we'll be coming back to our bill scrutiny. Moving on then to item number 9 is SR 2021/258, the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act 2020 Coronavirus Amendment of Relevant Period in Schedule 8, Number 2, Regulations NI 2021. There is a clerk's memo at page 275, and then the SR is at page 276. The committee considered the SL1 at our meeting on the 25th of August, and there has been no changes to the policy content since then. So the rule is subject to confirmatory resolution procedure and will come into operation on the 29th of September. The Examiner of Statutory Rules has not yet reported on it, so members will be agreeing to the legislation subject to that report. So if members are content, we'll put the question. That the Committee for the Economy has considered the SR 2021/258, the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act 2020 Coronavirus Amendment of Relevant Period in Schedule 8, Number 2, Regulations NI 2021, and recommends that it be confirmed by the Assembly subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on then to item number 10, which is SR 2021/259, the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act 2020 Coronavirus Amendment of Schedule 11, Regulations NI 2021. There's a clerk's memo at page 283 and the SR itself at page 284. And again, we considered the SL1 at our meeting on the 15th of September, and there's been no change in the policy content since then. The rule again is subject to confirmatory resolution procedure, and the anticipated date that it will come into operation is the 29th of September. The Examiner of Statutory Rules has not yet reported on this rule, and so members will be agreeing to it subject to that report. So if members are content, we will put the question. that the Committee for the Economy has considered the SR 2021/259, the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act 2020 Coronavirus Amendment of Schedule 11 Regulations NI 2021 and recommends that it be confirmed by the Assembly subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on then to item number 11, which is SR 2021/260. The Education Student Fees, Amounts, Loan Repayment and Support, etc. Amendment Regulations NI 2021. There is a clerk's memo at page 300 and the SR itself is at page 302. The committee considered the SL1 at our meeting on the 15th of September and there's been no change to the policy content since then. This rule is subject to negative resolution procedure and will come into operation on the 1st of September. Is that 2022?
That should be 2022.
Yeah. So on the 1st of September 2022, the Examiner of Statutory Rules has not reported on this rule, so members will be agreeing to the legislation subject to that report. So members are content. We'll put the question, which is that the Committee for the Economy has considered the SR 2021/260, the Education Student Fees, Amounts, Loan Repayment and Support, etc. Amendment Regulations NI 2021 and has no objection to the rule subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report.
Thank you.
And if the Minister doesn't mind, we will do the final SR, which is item number 12, SR 2021/268, the High Street Coronavirus Financial Assistance Scheme Regulations NI 2021. There's a clerk's memo at page 313 and the SR is at page 314. The committee considered the SL1 at its meeting on the 25th of August and changes to policy content since the SL1 were submitted and considered at its meeting on the 15th of September. The rule is subject to negative resolution procedure and came into operation on the 24th of September. Members will be aware that the scheme itself opened for application on the 27th of September. So the Examiner of Statutory Rules has not yet reported on this rule, so members will be agreeing to the legislation subject to that report. So members are content to put the question.
Sure, just a question on this one. The committee support for this isn't required for the scheme to have moved forward and for payments to be made, is that correct?
Yeah.
Well, then in the absence of the inclusion of 16 and 17-year-olds, then I don't think I'll be able to support it.
We just note.
So, Chair, we've previously noted the SL1. We can note the SR. It's already in operation. The facility is there because it's negative resolution to bring a prayer of annulment. If members don't wish to do that, but are just wishing to note once again, then that leaves things as they are.
Chair, I mean, on that basis, I appreciate people can, as maybe other committees sometimes, individuals have noted their particular concern. I mean, certainly I would really like to be recorded as indicating I would be supportive of the SR. I think that this is something, I think it would seem to be a little bit churlish of the committee, notwithstanding the argument that will go back and forward about whether there should be something either separately for whether there should be inclusion of 16 and 17-year-olds. This is something I think which is going to be very advantageous to our wider retail and economic sector. And I think, certainly from my point of view, I feel simply noting it does give a somewhat inadequate response on that basis. So certainly, whether it's the committee supporting the SR or whether they want to take individual indications of where people are, but certainly I'd be supportive of the SR.
Yeah. So members who wish to support the rule can have that put on record, and obviously, as John has highlighted, a number of members have raised the questions around the policy content previously, and we noted the SL1, so we can note the SR in the same way, and if people want to express their support, they're free to do that.
Chair, we did note that in the minutes previously. Those members that supported.
Record-based support from the SR, please.
I was concur with that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so on that basis, we will go back to our ministerial briefing, which is item number 6 in our packs, and this briefing will be Hansarded as is protocol. There is an updated clerk's memo at page 129. There is a memo written for a previous briefing at page 132. A copy of departmental briefing papers on ERAP at page 136. A copy of the Economic Recovery Action Plan at page 142. A copy of the High Street Voucher and 10X Micro Inquiry Report at page 172. And a copy of the common themes between ERAP, NDNA and the micro-inquiries at page 196, and then a copy of DFE's research to inform the High Street Voucher Scheme at page 206. So the Minister is attending in person, so thank you for joining us. And also joining us virtually are Paul Grocott, Head of Economic Strategy Group, Richard Rogers, Head of Energy Group, Michelle Scott, Economic Strategy Group, and Pierce McCann, EU Exit Resources. So, Minister, I'm going to hand over to you to make an opening statement, and then we can bring in members.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'm delighted to be able to join the committee members here this morning for an update on the work of the Department. I know that you have invited me here to discuss the Economic Recovery Action Plan, but I also know that committee meetings can take us on a journey, sometimes with an unknown route and destination. So I have also alongside me today, as you've said, Paul Grocott, Richard Rogers, Pierce McCann and Michelle Scott, just in case members might want to discuss wider economic issues or recent energy challenges that have hit the headlines. I have now been in this job for almost 3 months, and during that time I have been able to engage with hundreds of businesses across Northern Ireland, hearing how important the financial support that was given by this department has been in keeping them afloat over the past year and a half, as well as how important the High Street scheme is in reorientating spend back to the High Street. Now, all of us on the Executive have a responsibility to weigh up the economic, societal and health impacts of the decisions that we take in relation to COVID-19. And that can be very challenging, and I'm sure we haven't got everything right all the time, but I am determined that we avoid any further lockdowns, circuit breakers or restrictions on our economy. My focus is firmly set on building a healthy economy that creates opportunity for everyone in Northern Ireland, no matter where you're from, no matter your background, no matter where you are starting from. And whilst economic activity was severely curtailed over the past 18 months, there are clear signs that the reopening of the economy has had a positive impact. Indicative data relating to PMI surveys, mobility and high street footfall are showing a marked improvement, and job vacancy and furlough numbers are also more promising than they were just a few months ago. It has been 8 months since the Economic Recovery Action Plan launched and 6 months since the Executive agreed to provide an additional £287 million to help deliver the actions set out in the plan. Work is underway across my department and its ALBs to deliver these actions. We also launched our 10X vision and a number of 10X related plans. And whilst I cannot claim credit for the vision, I have been overwhelmed by the buzz it has created with stakeholders here in Northern Ireland and indeed much further afield. Only a fortnight ago I was at the Showcase event in London, and delegates from across the UK and as far away as the United States were complimenting the approach and agreeing with our priorities. Now, members will be aware that this is a significant week for the highest profile action within ERAP, the High Street scheme, and I do want to place on the record my thanks to Diane Dodds for bringing forward this scheme in its early stages, and the team at the department who have brought it to this stage. On Monday, the scheme portal opened and people have begun to apply for their prepaid cards. We knew that demand would be incredibly high, but our systems remained relatively robust. We have now verified thousands of applications. And can I take this opportunity to thank the Chair and other members of this committee, and indeed my executive colleagues as well, who helped to reassure the public about the systems that we had in place and encourage people to be patient during that time where there was a very high demand. This scheme will give the local economy a huge financial shot in the arm and also reorientate people towards our local retailers, hospitality, leisure and entertainment sectors. The Spend Local message is one that I am passionate about. Since my appointment as Economy Minister, I've heard from many business owners and individual workers about the incredible challenges they have faced, and the High Street scheme will provide a welcome boost to local businesses and will bring people back into our high streets. But securing funding and having plans that stakeholders endorse is good, but it's not enough. People deserve more. We need delivery, and we need to be agile. At its launch in February, it was recognised that the plan needed to be able to adapt to changing economic conditions. This was the start of our recovery journey. Since then, we have continued to listen to feedback and work collaboratively with our delivery partners. And thanks to this strong collaborative effort, 40 of the 58 actions that we had planned to do at the time of launch are now in progress or have been completed. We've provided £5 million of vital support to airlines as part of the Northern Ireland Domestic Aviation Kickstart Scheme to help maintain and enhance Northern Ireland's domestic air connectivity with Great Britain, and early indications are that the scheme is having a positive effect. We've extended support for the Innovate Us programme to include the social enterprise sector and to allow businesses to undertake a third innovation project. In response to feedback from industry partners, the Department launched a number of new assured skills academies, including the collaborative welding academies. And none of this would have been possible without the additional funding awarded to the recovery plan. And as we anticipated, the plan has evolved in this time. We have been able to scale our offering of support where the demand and benefit has been high. For example, InvestNI was able to launch a third call for applications for the Digital Selling and Capability Grant and a second call for the COVID-19 Energy Efficiency Capital Grant. And the Productive Investment Capital Grant has also reopened following high demand, and 39 projects from the pilot have been approved, and support for a further 60 to 70 projects is anticipated. Since its publication, 9 new actions have been added to the plan. These include raising the confidence and aspirations of young people in STEM education and careers, collaborating with Innovate UK to extend funding to Northern Ireland applicants who have been assessed worthy of Innovate UK funding but failed to secure it, and to provide additional support to businesses via the further education colleges to help them develop their capabilities in innovation and research and development. It's clear that significant progress has been made against the actions set out in the plan, providing the critical first steps in our economic recovery journey. It's important, however, that our efforts extend beyond the current financial year. We must continue to work collaboratively to overcome the damage to lives and livelihoods caused by the pandemic. Now, that's not going to be easy, and we're all going to need to take bold decisions if we are to realise the art of the possible. I hope that has been a helpful introduction, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Minister. And there's a number of things that you have mentioned that I'm sure members will want to explore in more detail. And I guess my first question will be around an issue that the Minister and I certainly will have no meeting of minds over, and that is Brexit. Obviously, over the past couple of weeks, we've seen the impact of Brexit in Britain become starkly apparent. While here, we're hearing about how the protocol is insulating businesses from those impacts, particularly in relation to the carbon dioxide shortages and also the fuel shortages. So given we're discussing economic recovery, which is clearly a priority in terms of supporting businesses, protecting jobs, workers' livelihoods, how do you justify your party's threat to collapse the institutions because of the protocol, put at risk those plans around economic recovery, when it's very clear that the protocol is protecting businesses from some of those worst impacts? And I think what we are seeing is that there has been a lack of recognition in some of the strategies that have been brought forward about the potential opportunities also for exporters under the protocol.
Okay. Well, look, first of all, I don't agree with the assertions that you've made in your questions that the protocol has in some way insulated businesses in Northern Ireland. It's the opposite, and I've visited well over 100 businesses now in many different sectors since becoming Economy Minister, and I'm hearing from them the challenges that the protocol is actually bringing. To begin with, you had mentioned the issues in Great Britain around fuel shortages, for example, and that is an issue, I think, to do more with HGV drivers, which the chair has just said is to do with Brexit. Well, it's not, because we're facing shortage. The Irish government were concerned about that in the summertime. It's also happening in other parts of Europe as well. Large part of this is actually down to skills issues, to the testing issues as well that we had had back in 2019. 3,000 people were able to get their HGV licences in Northern Ireland. In 2020, that was below 300. So testing has a big part to do with this as well. On that one issue of HGV drivers, that's not something that is unique to Great Britain or to Northern Ireland. It's a wider problem. In terms of what you've said, I actually believe that the protocol is harming businesses in Northern Ireland, and if you are in a position where you're trying to import goods, which now is the case, you're having to go through customs arrangements, etc., simply to bring goods from one part of the United Kingdom to another, that's having an effect on businesses. And we can't deny that that is the case. We can't deny that the protocol is solving the problems that we are facing at the minute. It's just not the case. They are compounding them. And I think that there needs to be some realism there in relation to that. We have now, I think, from the UK government, we've started to see some recognition of the problems that it is causing, and indeed I think even the EU now are realising the problems that are being caused. And if we do want a healthy economy, we need to make sure that those problems are dealt with.
Minister, I think you have a somewhat blinkered view of the protocol in terms of the protection that it is providing and in relation to these issues in general. And I think that there is recognition that there has been some issues with implementation, and those discussions are ongoing to try and identify solutions. And I think it's important that we all participate in that process and try to work in the best interests of businesses. And I'm not sure that that is the case from your perspective, from what you have said in relation to that. And I guess one of the things that we do know that could help reduce those difficulties between East and West in terms of trade would be an SPS agreement. And is that something that you will be willing to explore further and to support?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to recognise that the problems exist in the first place, and I welcome your acknowledgement that there have been problems, and I hope that parties are moving away from wanting rigorous implementation of the protocol to actually recognising the problems that exist. SPS is a so-called solution that the EU have put forward. It doesn't deal with all of the issues that people are facing, and essentially it says you have to be signing up to our rules again, and then that might sort out some of the issues that are being faced. Fundamentally, I think that there are other ways in which these challenges can be dealt with. I think we need to look at those alternative arrangements that have been put in place. Of course, those alternative arrangements have been there for a long time. Because of a lack of political will, they haven't been explored, they haven't been developed. And what we have instead from the EU is this very blunt instrument of simply treating Great Britain as a third country compared to Northern Ireland, and that's where the issue actually lies. This is not a bespoke solution for Northern Ireland. This doesn't take into account our circumstances. This does not protect the Belfast Agreement. It is quite simply a very blunt tool. It's the same border that's put in place with the rest of the boundary of Europe, and that has huge problems for the supply chains between Great Britain and with Northern Ireland as well. And that's where the real issue is. That's what needs to be sorted out, not just for businesses, but for consumers in Northern Ireland, and not just for unionists, but for everybody across Northern Ireland. So we were in a place for a long time where governments and the EU and other parties were saying there is no problem, the protocol is great. We have at least now, I think most people have moved into the arena of recognising that there are problems. Now let's get those dealt with.
Well, Minister, I don't recall anybody saying the protocol is great. In actual fact, most of us were talking about how it mitigated against the worst impacts of Brexit and how it was a least worst option, is the terminology that I've heard an awful lot of people use in respect of the protocol. And I think it's a case of having your head in the sand if you think it is going to be done away with. It was something that was negotiated and agreed, and it needs to be implemented in a way that's going to work. But I don't think either you or I are going to come to any meeting of minds on this particular issue.
I might be able to convince you, if you give me a bit more time, maybe.
I don't believe that will be the case. So I will move it on to some other issues. And one of the ones you have picked up on there in your own comments was in relation to the issues around HGV drivers. And if I recall from the conversation that we had in a private meeting with yourself and the Deputy Chair around potential skills programmes that could be put in place to support getting more people equipped with those skills. If you maybe could speak to some of those issues. And I do want to explore with you the High Street voucher in a wee bit more detail as well, but if you could pick up on that specific issue and around those issues of labour shortages perhaps in general. We had a letter back this morning from yourself and the ERA Minister in relation to the issues that it's impacting in the meat sector as well.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, one of the easiest and quickest ways to provide some relief in regards to the HGV driver issue is to increase the testing capabilities that we have. First and foremost, I know that's not a matter for my department, but I have already shared with you the figures from where we were in the last couple of years, and I think that that's stark. If we had maintained the same level of testing in 2020 as we did in 2019, over 2,500 extra drivers would make a huge impact in Northern Ireland. So what we need to see is an increase there in terms of that testing. There are people that are coming forward for that, and I think that's good. We need to make sure that they can be tested. I think that when it comes to wider labour market shortages, this is something that is clearly of concern to us, and I know that it has been particularly important for the agri-food sector, potentially more than others. Edwin Poots has been involved in a lot of work with that, and writing, as I have, to UK government ministers, because ultimately this is a migration issue. We should be able to have that flexibility that we need within migration policy, so that we have additional talent and additional skills if we need to have that at the right time, and that's where this needs to be led from. And I'm certainly not going to be backward in terms of making those representations to the government to ensure that we have that skill set that we need.
In relation to potential skills programmes that the department is looking at, is that something that is being taken forward?
That is not something that we have right now, though it is something that can be further explored, and I'm more than happy to furnish the committee with further information on that when we have it.
Okay, and then the issue that I did want to pick up with you was in relation to the High Street voucher scheme, and I would put on record my thanks to officials from correspondence at the beginning of the week around some of those, I guess, initial teething issues that were to be expected with a huge volume of people trying to access the scheme at the start. Is there some figures that you could perhaps share with us in relation to the numbers that have registered so far, been successful so far, and how you think that the phone system that's going to come online to support those who can't use an online system for whatever reason, how that might roll out in the initial stages?
Yeah. So in terms of figures, I'm happy to provide an update on that. So we have now sent out over 1 million links to the database that will allow you to go, to the portal. And of those 1 million links, we have had 560,000 applications that have come back completed already. And we have begun now the process of verification, and the first 300,000 have been verified through the Electoral Office database. I think by anybody's measurement or standard, that is an incredible achievement within 48 hours to have had that many people sign up to a government scheme, and to have been able to have delivered that in terms of links being sent out, applications sent back completed and verified as well. And I think it shows the popularity of the scheme, and it shows, I think, that people want to support local businesses. And all the feedback that I've been getting from people is that they're looking forward not just to being able to spend money for themselves, but they genuinely want to help businesses that were struggling. They want to help the economy. They want to support those who have struggled. So I think that's a good news story that we've been able to get so many people applications completed so far. The portal telephone service will open on the 11th of October. And over the last few weeks, I've actually, I suppose, been surprised at just the scale of the number of people who have said that they want to help their friends and their family to apply, and the number of third sector organisations that are helping as well. Libraries NI have been fantastic. Advice NI. I know that many other MLAs have been opening up their offices to on extra days as well to help people with the process. In my own area, Mid and East Antrim Age Well Partnership are actually helping older people as well. So I think that the number, a lot of people that might otherwise have used the phone service, or that might not have had any technical skills, have actually been using the help of others to do that, and that's really encouraging. So I think that will help to deal with potentially huge numbers using the telephone service whenever it opens, which is why we delayed it for a couple of weeks so that people could find other ways. Because what I don't want is perhaps a more vulnerable person having to use the phone service if we can get somebody else to do it on their behalf in a way that's far easier.
Yeah, just in relation to the number of links that you have sent out versus the number of applications, and I know even from people who were commenting on my own social media that they had submitted 8 applications to get the email sent out because they obviously didn't understand that there was a delay and a queuing process there. So is that kind of filtered out at the stage of the links being sent out, or is it the potential, people could put in duplicate applications, not for malicious reasons, but because they think that they have to?
Yeah, no, we've actually sent out, and I don't know if Michelle or Paul have an updated figure there, but it's well over 1.5 million links in total that were sent out, and some of those then would have been duplicates, and we would have been able to pull out those. Paul, do you maybe have those updated figures?
That's the figure, Minister. Yeah, so there's 1.5 million requests, which would include some duplicates, and then of that figure, we've issued the 1 million links. That was at 9 o'clock this morning. So the rate at which this is increasing is remarkable. So those numbers, as soon as we note them down and advise, they're out of date. But that gives you a sense of the current position anyway.
So there were duplicates and other issues there that needed to be taken care of. But again, I think it shows the popularity of the scheme and people's eagerness to make sure they were signed up.
And then just in relation to, we had officials in just before you came in talking to October monitoring, and they indicated that there is 21 million being set aside for potential overspend to the High Street voucher scheme. And from, I guess, my crude understanding of it, approximately 10 million of that may be to increase population compared to what it was expected when it was being modelled. And then they mentioned that there was some potential for increased contractual charges. So could you perhaps explain to the committee, because we weren't under the impression that there would be any increased contract charges, and in fact Mr Nesbitt read from the Hansard of our briefing with officials at the end of August about the potential margin of error in the cost of the scheme. So if you could maybe just explain a wee bit about that.
Okay, so we have set aside and allocated £145 million for the High Street scheme. That is the budget for that. But we obviously wanted to make sure that there was a contingency in place, and NISRA had increased their population estimates, so we needed to keep, I suppose, a bit of latitude there, so that, and again, these are estimates that NISRA produced, so we wanted to leave a little bit of leeway. The additional contractual costs come in because the more cards you have to issue, the more cost is there as well. So taking those things into consideration, yes, we've got our budget for it. We wanted to build in a contingency. I know you might think, well, that's quite a contingency to build in, but we just want to make sure that that is covered and that we have that set aside, and that confidence is there. However, that money can then be put back if there is if the population estimates turn out to actually be overestimating what the population is. That money then can be redirected, and my officials are exploring where else that could go into other programmes that can help in economic recovery. So I know you probably think that's quite a wide envelope, but it's to take into consideration both the population estimates and the additional cost then that would come from procuring and sending out the cards and the use of the cards, etc.
Okay, so just in relation to that specific bit about the contract costs, so my understanding of the initial admin and contract piece of work was in and around 5 million in and of itself, so that seems like it's almost doubling in terms of you could potentially be looking at the same again for amending the scheme to take in, potentially another 100,000 people. Is there a reason as to why that's the case?
Well, it's not just it's for the additional people and for the additional cost then that come with it, but that's not entirely, the extra funding is not entirely for contractual costs. Paul, I'll bring you in at this stage, just maybe you can explain a little bit more around the precise allocation of where that would go.
Yeah, certainly, Minister, and just to add to the detail that you provided, and specifically on the contracts, I think worth referencing that the scheme was structured 140 million for the £100 cards to be received, and then the 5 million of you mentioned, Chair, for the delivery scheme costs. Those estimates were some time ago now, and obviously the nature of the scheme has developed, and therefore the contractual requirements in order for us to deliver the scheme in the way that we've had to deliver as a result of maybe access to data sets has changed. We've had to bring in more partners in order to deliver the scheme. So, for example, and then the development of a portal wasn't anticipated at the start when we estimated 5 million. And also the use of the telephone service that you mentioned earlier goes live Monday week. Additional contract costs that we've had to include, and then establish an upper estimate. The Minister mentioned this is contingency. Well, we don't expect to have to use that full contingency envelope. It's prudent for us to hold that and inform executive colleagues, which the Minister has done, of our intention to hold it. And then if the contract costs are lower than the maximum contingency envelope, then there's options available to us to use that. In addition, there's been further work done through engagement with colleagues in Jersey and then wider assessment of fraud and error. So while the department has a zero tolerance for fraud and error, the risk remains there, and it's prudent for us to, at this stage, include that within our project estimates. So that also explains part of that funding envelope being increased.
Thanks, Paul. That's useful for us, and it might be useful for committee to perhaps get a written briefing just in respect of that breakdown, if that could be arranged. And then just in relation...
Yeah, very happy to write, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And then just my final point, and Paul has mentioned it there in relation to the envelope might not be required, and the committee has made significant representation in relation to 16 and 17-year-olds being considered to be included as part of the scheme. Is that something that you would be open to at all as part of meeting the objectives, the policy objectives of this scheme, is which to get people back into our shops and supporting our local businesses, and that's another cohort that could help deliver on those objectives?
Yes, it is, and I think I've outlined certainly in the chamber some of the challenges that we have faced around that. And look, I did say I'm open to finding ways around that. There are a number of issues. First of all, it was the difficulty of verifying the identity of some 16 and 17-year-olds. If you look at the databases that we will be using, the electoral register, very, very few 17-year-olds are on the electoral register, some in the lead up to their 18th birthday. That would almost entirely then be out. It should catch about 70 to 80% of adults at least. That will then be gone almost in its entirety. The next stage then is the driving licence database. Again, very, very few people in the 16 and 17-year-old category will be able to have their identity verified in that way. Even then, if you look at some of the other ways in which we can verify identities, and it becomes more difficult. On top of that, there's additional regulatory issues around GDPR as well. And so the executive had given me the mandate to extend this to adults, to everybody over the age of 18. Certainly those weren't hurdles that I thought that we'd be able to overcome when the issue had been first raised. So those are issues that would need to be overcome. The other issue, though, is go back to the policy objective of the scheme. What are we trying to do here? First and foremost, we're trying to support businesses that had to close during the pandemic, or whose economic recovery had been harmed by the prolonged nature of that. If we are to look at this again and to do another scheme, we need to say, look, is this going to be, is there a sound reason for doing this? Is there still the need for that extra support for businesses? Or are there better options that could be used to help to stimulate the economy? So I don't like to close down any options, but those issues would need to be addressed.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you don't close down that option, and that is welcome for us to hear, and I'm sure other members will explore this in more detail. And I would just reiterate that point about the policy objective and the change in behaviour and getting people back onto our high streets, which is part of the objectives, obviously, and our younger cohorts are obviously particularly prone to be doing things online. So in terms of a change in behaviours, I have asked a number of questions, so I'm going to bring in other members. Peter, you're first up.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. I suppose you mentioned about a journey. If this is sort of an X Factor journey, don't know if this is the judges' houses round in that regard. You're maybe happy to take a break from Simon Cowell at the top of the table there, asking you some questions.
So you're Louis Walsh, is that?
Well, yeah, either that or Danny Minogue. There's an issue of self-identification in that regard. Before I get into, I suppose, the couple of issues I want to explore, just mention in terms of the high street vouchers, I think the statistics you revealed this morning are remarkable in terms of the level of processing. I know various of us maybe had a little bit of frustration at times trying to get on, but I suppose to put it in context, if we're talking about 560,000 online applications in the space of 48 hours, in terms of certainly that timescale, if you think about electoral registration, which can be rolling from month upon month to achieve those sort of figures, or even if you take a look in terms of the scale of something like free school meals in terms of applications, which would roughly speaking impact on about 100,000 children, some drawn from the same family over a longer period of time. I suspect in terms of the volume and the timescale, that must be the greatest level of processing of online applications at any stage in the history of Northern Ireland. So I think that I think is to be very much welcomed in that regard. But two interrelated aspects I want to probe on economic recovery. And I suppose it's natural that, particularly considering in terms of the spend, and because I think basically the bulk of the economic recovery money will come from the COVID consequences. So therefore there's a requirement for spend to be in year. Obviously, naturally, and I think it is of high level of importance, people will focus in on the short to medium term measures that are part of that. But also underpinning economic recovery, I think also need to be the building blocks to make sure that we have an economic recovery programme for the years and even decades ahead, which can build a strong economy in Northern Ireland. And I suppose in particular one of the aspects that we've seen from the pandemic is in terms of jobs, the need for flexibility. We've seen a situation in which I think thankfully actually the economy in many ways has bounced back quicker and better than we probably anticipated a year ago in that regard. But it highlights probably the need for ensuring that we have a system which is fit for purpose as we look particularly for young people towards careers. So I wonder maybe you just outline where we are with, because it's something that predated the pandemic, but a need effectively to restructure and update where we are in terms of that careers advice service, and indeed ensuring that there's that cooperation on that. And then once you've answered that one, I'll maybe go on to the wider context of young people in terms of the 14 to 19 strategy, but maybe you can first of all deal with the careers issue.
Yeah, no problem. And I just want to comment first on what you had said about the High Street scheme. It is incredible that so many people in the first instance have wanted to apply and that so many were so quickly processed. I remember hearing figures recently that during the 2019 election campaign for Westminster, 90,000 people had applied to go onto the electoral register, and that had been overwhelming almost overwhelming for the electoral office over the course of 6 weeks. In the course of 2 days, we've been able to process 500,000 applications. So I think it does speak to a little bit of both the popularity of the scheme and the way in which we've been able to process them. And I think it has been a good news story. The member's also absolutely right in what he says in terms of the building blocks that we need for that healthy economy that we all want to see, and skills are a vital part of that, and I have seen that over the last number of weeks as I have been with foreign direct investors and other job creators who I think nearly every single one of them have said to me that it was the skills of our young people and the talent of our young people and the support that we were able to provide, such as through Assured Skills Academies, that helped to build up the skills of our people as well. Those were the things that were most important to them. So it's incredibly important that we get this right, and that work has to begin now, because we need those skills to be in the pipeline in future years whenever they are necessary as well. In particular, and you'll see this in the 10X economic vision, is the importance of a digital spine. We're in a changing world. It's very different even from when I was at school, never mind when you were at school, Peter, but digital skills are increasingly important. I think most jobs now require a basic level of digital literacy. I think over the course of the pandemic we have seen the importance as well of for social reasons, and this is one of our core sectors, that we need to have those ICT skills as well, which is why I think that it's important that we look at that skills pipeline and make sure that we have people with the skills that they need in order to compete and get those jobs that are becoming available in Northern Ireland today. And from my own point of view, I think it would be really important for us to go a little bit further back into education, into primary level and at secondary level, look at how we are providing those ICT skills and ensuring that our young people have the qualifications. And to that end, I would be very strongly supportive of making ICT a compulsory subject at GCSE, because I think if you are doing that from an earlier age, you're setting in young people's minds the importance of these skills and opening up their minds to the possibilities of how can I use this in my future and in the jobs that might be available to me. So I think that's important that we look at the ICT issue, but also careers more widely. Things are so different from a number of years ago, and as I've been going around, I've spoken to a lot of parents and industry about this. I think we need to look at how we deliver careers, the advice that we give, the independence of that advice, and we're in a rapidly changing economic environment, and we need to make sure that young people aren't just looking to the next stage of their education, but they're looking beyond that to the jobs and opportunities that are available, and working back to make sure they have the skills that mean they can be competitive.
Look, I think that's very important. I mean, I suppose first of all, in terms of, again, the figures you mentioned about the electoral office, I know that the electoral office said, I think whenever, possibly slightly erroneously in terms of the interpretation, the finance minister had indicated that he needed to be on the new electoral register to be able to register for the £100 voucher scheme. I know the electoral office indicated that I think within 24 hours they had 81,000 applications, which compared, I think, with a very similar figure to a number of weeks period. But even taking that 81,000, that's 1/7 of what's been processed in 2 days, by the department in that regard. I suppose, to finish off on the broader issue around education, skills and careers, I suppose maybe to draw the analogy that with ICT and with STEM, that's a broader bit of what happens directly within the education system is, as you say, the pipeline. The careers is possibly then what direction you point the pipeline in that regard, or facilitate within that. But obviously key to that as well then will be the ongoing work, which I know has been happening for a number of years, to try and get this piece together. in terms of very specifically the 14 to 19 strategy, which obviously is cross-cutting between economy, education, between specifically in the 14 to 19, between secondary education, between further education and higher education. I just wonder if you could update us to where the 14 to 19 strategy stands, and I suppose what we could anticipate to see in the rest of the mandate as regards to that.
Yeah. Well, look, 14 to 19 strategy, I know it's something obviously that you'd have been working on in a previous role, and again, really important that is reflective of where we're actually at right now in our economy, and that there is that joined up and collaborative working on that issue, because it is essential, as I have said, and as I've just outlined, to making sure that we have the right skills. And like you say, that we're putting that in the pipeline. I've worked closely with the Education Minister, and at official level there's been a huge degree of collaboration and cooperation, as you are aware. Unfortunately, I don't have a date for you at this moment in time, but Chair, I'll be happy to keep the member updated.
But we are anticipating progress on that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Keith?
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks, Minister, for coming along.
Okay.
Minister, we obviously heard the overwhelming success of the High Street voucher scheme and the rollout out of it. Obviously, some is trying to belittle that success, but we're not going to go there. It's disappointing that this committee, to be fair, has not unanimously agreed the SR for that. It is disappointing, and any business out there or the hospitality listening to that would be disappointed that the negativity from some within the committee. But I want to move on now. I think we've touched on that fair enough. On furlough numbers, obviously furlough, the Minister, is ending in a few days, and no doubt others driving through your constituency, there's jobs nearly in every sector, and there's a pool of work out there, and you'll get some commentary from people. If anybody wants to work, there's no reason why they can't work at this current state. So what's your thoughts on furlough ending and the whole sort of labour pool and shortage of labour at the moment in conjunction with furlough? And I think there's 37,000 people furloughed, approximately thereabouts. Where are they furloughed at? And that seems a very high figure.
Yeah. So furlough is one of many support mechanisms that were put into place as a result of the pandemic. And they were put in place because businesses couldn't open, or there were restrictions on businesses. That's why we had furlough and flexible furlough, part-time, and all the rest of it. And that's now coming to an end. It'll be ended by the end of this week. And so we will go from having 36,000 people on furlough to having nobody on furlough. And that is a cause of concern, in particular because we haven't yet, I suppose, opened up in the way that other parts of the UK have. The biggest area in which people are furloughed is retail. There's about 6,500 people furloughed in retail and wholesale. There are around 6,000 in hospitality, and around 1,500 in arts, entertainment and leisure. So that's in and around 14,000 of the 36,000 furloughed in that way. And then, of course, there's so many other jobs that come from that service or provide for those jobs as well. So look, it is a concern. That's why I have been pushing for the full and uninterrupted reopening of the economy. That's what we have been working towards. Hospitality in particular, I'm disappointed that we have still to make further decisions on relaxations in terms of hospitality. It's clearly for decision for the executive to make, but the end of furlough will create difficulties there. We have called for sector-specific furlough for some of those industries in particular, such as aerospace. That will take that little while longer to recover, but there will clearly be changes by the end of this week.
Okay, thank you for that, Minister. Minister, yesterday there was a Danish delegation within the Assembly, and obviously I met them from our party, and all the parties were met as well over lunch. And it was actually good to hear, and it's good to hear again today, that some parties now realise that the protocol is not working. So the implementation in full that we heard drummed several months ago back in the Assembly That rhetoric's now changing. I refer to some people in the past were in COVID bubbles. I think some people's in a protocol bubble. I don't know whether they go out in their community or in their constituency and are listening to real business. I just don't know how they're not listening to that message. What message did you receive from those 100 businesses, or approximately 100 businesses you met? What was the message you got from them?
Yeah, well, look, the first thing that I would say is, in many of those cases, I wasn't asking. I wasn't saying, dish the dirt, tell me all about the protocol. That's certainly the way it wasn't. This is information that is volunteered, and volunteered very easily, because the effect on so many businesses is so clear and so critical to them. And it's depressing. It's very disheartening to see people struggling in that way. They've ran their business for so long, and some of the most frustrating, I think, examples came from people who said, look, this is something that I have done for 20 or 30 years. I have brought X product into Northern Ireland. There's zero risk of it going into the European Union, yet we now have all of this additional paperwork. I am staying up all night filling in forms, not sure if anybody's ever going to read them. I am spending time having to try and get advice. And this is all, of course, with hundreds of millions of pounds of government support, trying to make it easy, but it's still requiring businesses to take on additional people. It's still requiring additional paperwork to be filled out. So look, let's leave previous debates, previous arguments behind, all the rest of it. Let's accept that there are problems. Yeah. And if we can't accept that there are problems, then how do we deal with it? How do we get the solution to it? That's been lacking from many over the last number of months. I think we're starting to see a bit of realism now. I think people are starting to recognise that there is a problem, and importantly that it's not sustainable and that it can't go on. And I hope other people will continue to move into that space.
Just one final quick question, if I may, Chair. Touching on lockdowns, or the threat of lockdowns. Obviously, we've had numerous lockdowns across the pandemic, and the nervousness that causes within business. Are you picking that up, Minister, in regard to people talking, well, could be a lockdown in October? Is that sort of squeezing and controlling business? Is that overarching them? Is it creating a shadow over the top of them? What's your thoughts on that?
I think potentially in the hospitality industry, because it's yet to fully reopen. As I said, there were 6,000 people in that sector still on furlough. When furlough ends, what do those people then do? Do they say, well, look, there's still too much uncertainty in this sector, so I'm going to go in? So it's really unhelpful, I think, when people are speculating like that. I think what we actually need to do is look at the facts of where we are. We're very, very close to having 90% of the adult population vaccinated, or certainly at least have their first dose. That's incredible. I don't think back in January time we were looking anywhere near that. In fact, I think some of the advisors had said getting to 70 or 80% would be enough to allow us to ease restrictions. Now, I understand Delta variant, other issues have come into play since then. But even at that, having 90% vaccinated in that way is incredible. I think if you look at the daily rate, it has gone down from where it was a few weeks ago. I think yesterday we were under 400 cases per 100,000 for the first time in many, many weeks. So things are all heading in the right direction. And what is continually going up is the number of people getting vaccinated. And that's why I think we have reasons to be hopeful as we move forward that we can leave the pandemic behind.
Thanks, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Yep, no, thanks, Peter. And I listened to what you said in relation to furlough with interest, because I think, I don't have the figures in front of me, but there's something like 5,000 still furloughed in manufacturing and 5,000 still in construction, and obviously those are for issues beyond just the control of the executive. So I do think it is important that we at least have a sector-specific approach to furlough being extended, and I welcome your comments in respect of that too, because it is going to push more people onto universal credit, which is deeply inadequate at this point in time. Stephen, you're next up.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for your attendance today and your detailed answers so far. Just to obviously concur with the warm welcome on the Spend Local card. Firstly, I know I've visited a number of local businesses right across my constituency of North Down in recent weeks, as recently as yesterday as well, and certainly there is a real appetite amongst those traders and local business people get the cards out, and the incredibly impressive number of applications is testament to that. And certainly there's a real appetite right across the public, as you say, to get out and support businesses across such a range, as you say, not just retail and hospitality, but right across our town centres and right across Northern Ireland, from villages to rural areas to our towns and city centres. And the phone line was mentioned. I think I do look forward to that. It is great, obviously, to see people, getting the online access as much as possible. But there is still a role for the phone lines, and I welcome that. And I look forward to that coming forward. Just in terms of another positive scheme, which I know some sectors are looking forward to and the public are looking forward to as well, just in terms of the holiday at home voucher scheme, which I know is another innovative and exciting project within your department. If you could just maybe touch briefly upon that, Minister, just in terms of timescale. Obviously, we are now in the run up to Christmas. We've got the High Street scheme, so what would be the optimum time to really push that scheme? And I have a couple other questions, if I'll just rattle through them here quickly. Confidence in our town and city centres remains a key challenge, and I suppose it links in with the working from home message where possible, which still really exists, I suppose, particularly within the public sector. And I suppose obviously there's many advantages to that, but it also has an impact on footfall, particularly in our town and city centres. And just, I suppose, how do you feel we can get that confidence back? Obviously, that footfall impact with people working from home, affects cafes and hospitality sector, and our coffee shops and all sorts of small independent traders. So if you could just maybe touch upon that, and then just finally, when I'm on, just touch upon those air connectivity and our 3 local airports, which is obviously vital for our economic recovery. The pandemic has obviously had a significant impact on this sector. Passenger numbers are well down. Of course, this is a global issue. It's not particular to Northern Ireland, but it certainly has an impact. And you mentioned the domestic aviation kickstart scheme, which is welcome, which was announced in May earlier this year. But I suppose what more can be done to, obviously boost confidence and get numbers up within our airports and increase air connectivity closer to pre-COVID levels. And just finally, in terms of the protocol, just linking in with the aerospace sector, when I'm on the subject, the committee had a useful meeting back in early July of this year with key players within the aerospace sector. And I certainly found it very interesting that they highlighted real problems that they are facing with the protocol. I think that was very noteworthy. It wasn't coming from politicians or any other sources. It was coming directly from the industry, the experts, and they certainly made it very clear to us about problems they were facing with the protocol. So I would appreciate any updates. I know there's been quite a lot there, but I would appreciate if you can touch on some of them. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Minister.
Okay, well, you've certainly got your money's worth in there anyway for questions. Stephen, first of all, can I just thank you as well for the work that you have done in helping local businesses to be aware of the scheme and the work that you've done in your own constituency, because I think it is important that people understand that the prepaid card is not just for one sector. It's for retail and hospitality and entertainment and leisure. We could go on and on. I think it's really important, and I know that you've been involved with businesses across all of those sectors, and I do want to thank members as a whole for the work that they have done to help to inform the public and inform businesses, because a lot of work has gone on that over the last couple of months, and I think that's what's going to help make the scheme a success. The first question was in relation to the holiday at home scheme, and that's a scheme that is going to be best if it's done at the right time. Obviously, we spent an awful lot of time and work making sure that we got the High Street scheme at just the right time. And I was pleased whenever I launched it, the representatives of retail organisations had said to me this could not have come at a better time. I want to make sure we're doing the same for the holiday at home scheme. To that end, it's probably not best to do that at the same time as the High Street stimulus scheme, because that could provide a bit of that overlap might not be helpful. So we're continuing to work with industry to work out when the best time that would be. But of course we will keep the committee updated in relation to that. The next question was in relation to confidence in town and city centres. And this is where I hope that the High Street scheme will not just be good for a short-term boost, but long-term people would be able to come back and go into the high streets again, first of all realising that it's safe to do so, because I think so many of our businesses have gone to great lengths to ensure that the shopping, hospitality experience is safe and gives people confidence. But that people will also see what's on offer and want to come back again and reorientate that spend. But you touch on an important point, which is getting workers essentially back into our town and city centres. And this is where the working from home messaging is something that I would like to see moved on, both in the private sector and in the public as well. The executive guidance currently states that people should work from home where they can. I know, as I've been contacted by many businesses saying, look, we want to be able to get back, but we don't want to be seen to be going against government guidance, executive guidance. Now, I do not think that anybody that's currently in that environment intends to bring back 100% of their employees 100% of the time. I think that hybrid working is here to stay in one form or another. But I think if people want to be able to come back and want to plan for that and want to put contingency measures in place, they should be able to do that. And I think that will be an additional boost to our high streets as well. I mentioned air connectivity, and he recognised the NIDAC scheme, which has been very successful, very well received by the industry, by airlines and by airports. And I think that we'll see more work done on that, measuring the impact and the success of it. But I think it's been particularly important in this key period where we haven't been able to open up again fully, and when there are still restrictions on travel and restrictions on the economy in general. So helping airlines and airports get through that period was really important. But now we need to move to the next stage. How can we help air connectivity? Well, one way that we can do that is obviously encouraging people to come here and to visit Northern Ireland. And I think that what will be really helpful in that is the £5 million campaign that we launched, encouraging visitors in Great Britain to come to Northern Ireland. I think that we've gotten in the way of staycations domestically in the UK, and hopefully that campaign will help bring more visitors and travellers, but also business travellers as well. We had a great reputation as a place for conferences, and we've now opened that up again. So let's get more people in to Northern Ireland. That's a great way of supporting what we have and then encouraging and facilitating further air connectivity. But I think more than anything else, what would be most helpful is the scrapping of air passenger duty. And this is something that I have made representations to the government about. It is something that I have spoken to Sir Peter Hendy, who's conducting the union connectivity review. I think that it could be potentially a game changer in terms of the levels of connectivity that we can have and making it easier for people to travel internally within the UK. And we don't have those rail or road links. We don't have alternative options for that, and we are in competition with airports, specifically Dublin Airport. So if we want to improve air connectivity, let's get more people, let's have additional people coming in and out. But air passenger duty, I think, is a big one, in addition to the support that we as a department have given. He touches again on the protocol, and it'll come as no surprise to him to know that what he is hearing is what I have been hearing as well. I think you'd have to be living under a rock not to understand the concerns that businesses have been having and the difficulty that it's been causing, and some sectors have been affected by that more than anything. And that's why when you look at our supply chains, when you look at our economy, it doesn't make sense for there to be a border down the Irish Sea. Look at the volume of trade and all of the issues involved in that. It just doesn't make sense. So it needs to go, and we need to find the solutions to that. That will require political will.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Chair, thank you. Minister, I'm going to try on sport in a minute.
Right.
But first, I want to go back to the High Street voucher, because when your officials briefed us on the 25th of August, NISRA had already increased their estimate of eligibility from 1.4 to 1.5 million. So your officials were modelling on 1.5. On an uptake of 95 to 97%, and a spend of £98 on average out of the 100. And on that model, we were told that the likely overspend was £2 to £3 million, 1 to 2%. So I'm still unclear what has happened since then for your department to set aside 21 million or 15% as a contingency.
Okay. So I think what the member is maybe doing is accusing us of being too careful, and that's okay.
I'm simply seeking clarification.
Yep. No. Look. Okay. I understand. I think that we want to make sure that we have the capacity there, that we have the contingency for that. Those figures were obviously based on, like you say, a 95 to 97% uptake. What if that is higher? What if the average spend is actually maxed out? What if the NISRA estimate figures that we were given, what if it goes beyond that and the associated cost? I'm happy to bring in Paul again if there's any further clarification that you're looking for. That's my understanding. And
Paul's writing to us, Minister. I'm happy.
Okay.
The other question I'd like to ask on the voucher is this. It's clearly intended for a high street spend and not online.
Mm-hmm.
What is to stop somebody walking into Tesco at Knocknagunny and buying a £100 Amazon voucher and spending it online?
Okay, so the coding may well allow that, because we get people. There's certain things that we can block people from spending. So, for example, gambling and financial services. It's been easy for us to stop that. Some of those things we haven't been able to stop. So technically, it may be possible, yes, for someone to go in and to do that. That is not a major concern for me for a number of reasons. First of all, the research that we have shown, that we have been given, demonstrates that people actually want to spend it supporting businesses. They want to support independent retailers. They see the good, they see the policy objective, and they want to help those that have suffered most. I have had nobody that has come to me and have said, I really want to support Amazon during this difficult time. I haven't heard that from anybody. So I think that the initial intention of most people starting off with, that's where they actually want to spend it. They want to spend it locally. Secondly, we have a advertising campaign encouraging people to spend local, and we're going to be pushing that message. And thirdly, I think it's the incentivisation that local businesses are going to that they're going to give. Local businesses that I have been speaking to have said that they're encouraging people to spend their card locally, and if they do, they may give an extra 10% off. Or if it's in hospitality, you may get a free drink or coffee or whatever else it might be. So there will be those incentivisation schemes there as well. So taking those in the round, I think that's going to cover the vast majority of people.
Moving on then, next year sees the 100th anniversary Ulster Grand Prix. There's plans for a round of the British Superbikes and, of course, the North West 200. Are you in a position to support these events, which generate some £20 million for the economy?
So there are a number of major events that we are currently looking at right now and seeing what support the department or its agencies can provide. I look back over the last decade and see a number of major events. I fully recognise the economic opportunities that they can bring, the jobs that they can sustain, and I think if you look at the Open in particular, it has been a major draw in actually bringing people into Northern Ireland. So there is an incredible economic benefit that can come from us holding major events. There are a number that we are looking at right now. I hope you'll understand if I don't go into the details of where they are all at, but certainly I can say as a department and our bodies, we want to be able to support where possible, and where there is that business case and where it is value for money, we want to make sure that we do that.
Can I ask then, will you consider supporting the Northern Ireland senior women's team at the Euros in England next year? This is only the fifth time a senior team has qualified for major finals. I'm old enough to remember the second time, which was Spain '82, and the late Harold McCusker being very exercised that the Tourist Board, and it was probably the Industrial Development Board, but Invest, were not at the team hotel with a stall promoting Northern Ireland, and that is an opportunity, I believe, that could be considered with the women's team in England next summer.
Okay. I don't have any memory of that particular event in 1982. I have no memory of 1982, but certainly there has been nothing that has come into the department that I'm aware of at this time, but of course I'd be more than happy to look at how we can support any request that comes in.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. John.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for attending today's meeting. Minister, of the 100 businesses that you met and who expressed concerns to you about the protocol, do any of them support your party's proposal to collapse the Assembly and set preconditions that I believe neither the British government can meet, the European government can meet, or even your colleagues here in the Assembly, the other parties in the Assembly, can assist you in getting met? Did any of the businesses support that?
So I think many of the businesses that I have spoken to are absolutely in tune with the need to get the protocol addressed. They recognise that the border in the Irish Sea is not helping stability, it is not helping the conditions that they need, and the trading links that they need, and the lack of friction that they need to do what they have been doing for so long and getting us to the place that we need to get to, John. There are legitimate concerns that they have expressed. I am seeing it. I think most people understand and see the problems that businesses are having as a result of the protocol, and I want to make sure that they are addressed.
Yes, but I accept there are legitimate concerns, but I take from your answer none of the businesses support your party proposal to collapse the Assembly.
No, that's certainly not what I said. A lot of those businesses I met perhaps before the announcements have been made, but absolutely the businesses were very strong with me about the need to get this issue sorted out. You have to understand what some of these businesses are actually going through and the difficulties that they're facing. You need to understand the pressure that they find themselves under, and the additional workload that has been placed upon them, the employees that have had to be diverted to deal with some of these issues, or in some cases the employees that have had to be let go because they're not able to operate parts of their businesses. And John, you'd have heard this as well. There's no way that you couldn't have heard the challenges that are coming, because this is not a unionist issue. This is affecting businesses right across Northern Ireland, especially those that are dependent upon getting goods from the rest of the UK, from GB. So that'll not be a surprise to you either about the difficulties that the protocol is causing.
I've had businesses approach me and engage with me about the challenges they face in relation to Brexit/protocol. But I also, what they expect politicians to do is to work out those problems. Mm-hmm. I've also had businesses who are creating jobs and prosperity as a result of the protection the protocol offers them. And my concern is that your department is blind to that, and that we will miss opportunities to create jobs in all our constituencies and create prosperity for the people that we represent, because your department has turned a blind eye to those issues.
Well, I would strongly disagree with that, because first of all, I think that the protocol is what's causing greatest economic harm, and that needs to be dealt with. But secondly, I have not had some great stampede or really any number of people come to me saying, look at the opportunities that we have here. That's just not something that I'm getting. We've created over 4,000 new jobs in Northern Ireland since January 2020. the protocol is not the reason why they have come here. It's the talent of our people and the skills of our people. And let's just address it while we're talking about it, this notion of dual market access. We don't have dual market access in Northern Ireland. If you had access to a market, you're able to take things in, you're able to import and to export. We don't have dual market access here because we can't get that access from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. That's what's causing the issues. And a lot of companies are actually seeing the difficulties of not being able to source goods from GB without an awful lot of hassle.
Well, I don't have the exact words in front of me, but recent comments from Invest NI would suggest to me that they are being approached by businesses in relation to the access we have on the opportunities created under the protocol.
They may well have been approached by that, but of course it doesn't take long for someone to actually look through what the protocol actually means, and they will recognise that there are difficulties, because it's not dual market access. Let's just nail that on the head. It's partial between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That causes a huge problem.
Well, I don't want to labour on this too much, but if I was Minister of the Economy and I wasn't being approached by businesses to discuss this, I would be seriously concerned.
Yeah.
Because other members are being approached.
But that's maybe because you've bought into the line that the dual market access is something that is actually what is in place when it's not.
Or they believe they have a minister who would be hostile to their proposals.
But it's just simply not the case that we have that dual market access.
Is your office open to businesses who believe that they can create jobs and prosperity as a result of the protocol?
Well, sorry, if someone wants to come here and create jobs and prosperity, well, absolutely. But I don't think it was, and our evidence has shown that it's not because of the protocol. Where are we getting our success from? We're getting our success right now because of the skills that our people have, or the support that we are able to give them in upskilling people as well. So it's fairly straightforward. That's where the investment has come right now. And regardless of that, though, our focus needs to be on improving the situation that we find ourselves in right now, and the difficulties that are being caused by the protocol and the East-West trade issue.
Okay, well, we'll agree to disagree on some of that.
There's a lot of that today, isn't there?
Well, there is, but that's politics, I suppose. But it's better to be in here debating it than for all of us to be out of here, because the conditions your party has set are unachievable for the restoration of the institutions. You may well get an election, but what happens after the election? We won't be in rooms like this interrogating each other or promoting, and you as Minister won't be able to be delivering the change programmes you want, because the conditions you have set are unachievable.
Well, if there is political will, of course they are achievable, and what we are proposing is in no way unattainable. We want to make sure that we have that ease of access between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and regardless of your constitutional position, we should surely want that ease of access between our biggest market and ourselves. But like I say, we may not agree on everything.
I want to move on just in terms of the economic recovery plan.
Yep.
The High Street Voucher Shop Local scheme, hugely popular, and why wouldn't it be? Hard-pressed families and businesses receiving financial support from the executive. Great initiative, fully supported, fully behind it. But I have a concern that it is the cornerstone of your economic recovery plan, that it is on the basis that if you give everybody £100, it's going to be the way forward in terms of economic recovery. I think you're overselling it in that way. It's a good idea, good scheme, worthwhile, but it is not going to lead to the economic recovery of our society.
So I've never claimed that it's going to be the only tool in our toolbox. Look at it this way, first of all. These are businesses that have suffered incredibly over the last 18 months. These are businesses that are, in many cases, have had to dig very deeply into their savings in order to survive. We want to get them beyond that survival mode now, and we want to help them get back to where they were. So I think this is important not only for a short-term economic boost and to help people that were very, very badly affected by the restrictions, but I do believe there's a longer-term economic impact on this. It's not just this immediate shot in the arm, but it is also that reorientation of spend back into local businesses and offline as well. I think that is a entirely proper and right way to do it. And I hope that we will see people, and I've been around a lot of businesses in Northern Ireland, and I didn't know how much we had on offer and the quality of some of what we had to offer. I hope other people, when they're thinking about how they're going to spend their card, will think the same. And not only will they go and spend that £100, but they'll spend a little bit more, and they'll keep coming back again when they see the customer service, when they see the ease in which they can shop and everything else. So it's certainly the highest profile part of the Economic Recovery Action Plan. It's the one everybody knows about. It's the one that I think will have by far the biggest immediate economic impact, although it will also have a longer term one as well. But of course it is just one tool in our toolbox, and we do have really good schemes in place that help with innovation, that help with upskilling, which help people to trade in different ways and to export to other places that they haven't been in before, and increasing the skills and ability of our people. So in terms of budget, it's a large part overall. In terms of immediate impact, yes, but those other parts are in there as well, and they're important too.
It's now with the additional £21 million, which I have to say is an astonishing amount of money or percentage, 15% leeway you have given yourselves in this. I don't think any business case would stack up on that, and if that was to be passed by the usual business case process, I can't say how that would stack up. So you have given yourself an additional £21 million. It means it's over 50% of your economic recovery plan spend is based on the voucher scheme. So
we're not allocating it to it, we're holding it back. There is a contingency in place, but yes, I make no bones about it. This is a 1 year budget that we have. We have to spend it in year, and I'm glad that we can target it in this way to help those that had immediately had so many difficulties after the pandemic and still during some of these restrictions. So I think it is right to give that economic boost. We could have given it directly to businesses, but we're using consumers as a conduit to filter that through to them instead. And I think I think it's right. But I want to see this go on beyond the next financial year. I think some of the things that we're doing in terms of helping to upskill, helping to promote innovation, helping our businesses to export into new markets, those are things that can continue.
Well, one of my experiences, and I end on this point, Chair, because I know there's at least one more member to come in. One of my experiences, Minister, and frustrating experience it is actually getting public money spent. But see, in particular, if you have an unplanned programme of spend, and if you don't use that £20 million and you're in the last quarter of the financial year and you're trying to spend £20 million, I can assure you it's going to be very, very difficult to get that money spent. So you need to be doubly reassured that the decision to hold back such a significant amount of money is the right one.
So we are currently looking at the other options. We've rolled out some very successful programmes already under ERAP. We can put out second and third, and in some cases fourth calls to these. Officials are looking at that, and like I've already said, I'll be more than happy to keep the committee updated on that.
Okay, thank you, Minister.
Okay.
Thank you, John. Claire?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, and welcome to the committee. Some members have already mentioned some of the things that I will raise, but maybe there's elements of it that they haven't asked. So I'll start with the holiday at home scheme. I submitted a parliamentary question to you quite recently in relation to that. And the response was that it will be facilitated on a first-come, first-served basis. Now, I shared this response with my constituents, and a number of people have come back and said that that's not legal. So I appreciate there's still a way to go in terms of developing that, so maybe that would be something you might want to look into. It seems a bit odd to me that a public sector scheme would be a first-come, first-basis type of thing, because I would imagine it would give rise to some forms of discrimination, but it might be something you want to consider. In terms of the high street scheme, there seems to be issues with specific email types. I myself applied for the scheme under a particular type of email and still haven't had a bounce back email. I've since applied with a different type of email and got it straight away. So again, that might be something you want to look into, and maybe even put a bit of information out to the general public there, because there are people who are still saying, Claire, I'm waiting 48 hours now, and they're going to keep doing that until someone tells them, look, you need to resubmit. So, you know, in terms of uptake of the scheme, in fact, there's many people who won't even have emails, so it might be something you want to consider as well. I will be applying on behalf of my parents because they don't have email addresses, but, you know, they don't need to use the telephone line because they have a daughter who can do those things. Will I be able to use the same email address that I have used to apply for me to be then subsequently sent the link to apply for them? Because in terms of the way it happened with me last night, I submitted my email address, I got the link, I was then able to use that link to input details, but I'm just conscious of this conversation around duplicates, and that could be where duplicates are happening, that maybe a daughter or whoever else is applying on behalf of a number of different people. Are they able to use the one email address? I think that's something you need to look at. Scam, and I do wonder, and I asked this question of the chair earlier, or you know, to ask the department. There is that considerable, I suppose, safety net, if you like, in terms of this scheme. I would sincerely hope that that isn't necessarily to pay for potentially payments made out in error or fraud payments. You know, because I appreciate that this will always happen. There will always be people who take advantage of these types of schemes, but I would hope the department has a robust enough process in place to ensure as many people as possible are not fraudulently applying, or that payments will be given in error as duplicates, because I think through other schemes that we've seen over this past year, there has been cases of that. So I'd be keen to know, you know, what your department's doing in relation to that. I think scamming generally, I'm aware of a lot of people receiving text messages saying, can you confirm that? So I think what might be useful for the department is to explain what will not happen as much as what will happen. My understanding is you put your email in, you click the link, you went through, whereas some people may think, well, they've got my mobile number, which you had to provide. Maybe I'm going to get a text message, and that's then giving rise to a scam because people are then going through links via that. So that's that one. My next question is around HGV shortages. I've been raising this issue for a while, so I don't think it's directly as a consequence of the protocol. I think it's as a consequence of probably immigration policy from Theresa May's 2011, I think it was, changes in relation to that. I also think the pandemic expedited a lot of people going home. So a lot of those HGV skills have been lost. I raised it with your predecessor via your special advisor as well about potentially an assured skills course around HGV, but he responded in saying that there is a licensing issue in relation to that, or there's some sort of technicality which meant that the department couldn't necessarily facilitate that. So I'd be keen to get a bit more detail in relation to that, because HGV shortages are significant. I'm also aware of where councils potentially have an opportunity to provide HGV type skills. And I would like to see more councils utilise that. Belfast City Council, to their credit, have utilised these types of courses. I've put it to my own council area. They didn't really seem interested, but maybe they require more support in doing that. And the last one is in relation to the domestic use of COVID vaccinations. I'm now receiving an awful lot of messages from students studying in Scotland from Northern Ireland who are being told that they cannot go into hospitality or other places because they don't have a confirmation of a double vaccination despite having that. I had written to the Minister of Health about this, I want to say, a number of months ago, and he had suggested to me that the regions of the United Kingdom were working together on some sort of certification for domestic use of a double vaccination certification. I appreciate it's not directly your responsibility, however it is affecting particularly students who are going across to Scotland where a COVID certificate is required. What's the Northern Ireland Executive doing for people from Northern Ireland, specifically from your remit of the Department of the Economy, to provide that confirmation for those who do have their double vaccination?
Is there anything else?
No, that's it. Well, there's plenty more, but hopefully that's the next one.
Okay. I think I got all of those down. The first one was in relation to the holiday at home scheme. We are, as I said to Mr. Dunn, just trying to work with industry to make sure that we get that at the right time. I'll just bring Paul in at the end on that and on the fraud scam issue, just to give Paul a heads up in terms of the legality around the first come first served issue. In terms of the different types of emails, I have, just before I came in here, I was alerted to that. Well, I got an answer to that after constituents had raised the issue with me also. It does seem to be the case that certain email providers had got these emails into their system and held them as spam, and in some way checking them out or doing some sort of checks on them before it would eventually go into the inbox. I'm not over all the technical details of it, but this is now being worked through. There's a bit of a backlog. That's why there's certain email addresses have gone straight through, and others it wasn't because of the delay on
for your
our
information,
end.
it's not going to spam either. You know, it's getting locked before it's even getting to the recipient.
It's getting locked before it gets anywhere near your own account. That's my understanding. That's now been worked on with the email providers, and there's just a backlog that's been worked through. But you don't need to apply again. Everything seems to be okay. And Paul might be able to give us a little bit more of the technical detail on that. In terms of you applying on behalf of somebody else, you apply on your own behalf.
Yes.
You'll get sent the link. You fill yours out, and then start the process again. And you'll be able to do that then the 4 times. But you will need to complete your application, but do them one at a time, completely, and then that's how that will go. Look, I totally understand the concerns around scams. I've tried very hard to alert people to the fact that there are many people out there who will be trying to take advantage of this. Again, we will never ask for your details, and I would just urge people to be careful, be vigilant, especially those in your family or your community that might be a little bit vulnerable to this sort of a scam. And Paul can go into a little bit more detail just on the fraud unit that we have and how that works. HGV shortages. You know, I think the big thing that can take pressure off here is getting the testing happening again. As it outlined to other members
Minister,
as well.
I've raised that with the Department for Infrastructure, and she says testing is not the issue, so there's an...
Right. Oh, well, it certainly is the case that we had high numbers of people that were being tested back in 2019, and that hasn't caught up again. But I'm happy to take that up with executive colleagues as well.
And potentially, I actually had a query this morning as well from a constituent who said that there was the UK government perhaps were offering a free course in relation to HGV, which is why I thought potentially around assured skills. You know, I speak to hauliers all the time, and they tell me, you know, hen's teeth to try and get people trained in this area. So whilst I appreciate testing may be another part of it, I do think HGV and the opportunity to upskill as well, you know, certainly, which is your remit. So
yeah, absolutely, and I think it is the case now as well that as a public and businesses are starting to value and understand the importance of people in this industry, and so we need to see that followed through. Look, I'm happy to explore whatever options that we can in relation to that, though I understand there may be some difficulties around it. In terms of domestic COVID vaccinations, although it may be the case that in some parts of the UK this is being asked for, that has to be an executive policy decision in terms of what certification would look like for Northern Ireland residents to use in other parts of the UK. But look, I just have to be honest with you and say that that's really an issue for the executive as a whole to decide on that.
As a member of the executive, would you take that, you know, concern back that students from Northern Ireland who are potentially studying in Scotland, where a double vaccination is required for entry into hospitality, are not able to get that? So, you know, as a member of the executive, would you take that back? Because, you know, we do have a mechanism where a COVID cert app is being used for international travel. So this isn't about what's required in Northern Ireland necessarily. This is about how people can confirm what they have. So if they have the double vaccination, how can they prove that in jurisdictions where it's required, I suppose?
No, I understand that, and it is something the executive will discuss. Paul, maybe I could just ask you to confirm that I got the or give a bit more detail in terms of the technical parts in terms of the email, and then the holiday at home and the fraud issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so as the Minister explained, we're preparing advice. It's working closely with colleagues in Tourism Northern Ireland, and we'll present that advice to the Minister shortly, so we can ensure the advice reflects that issue. Claire, if you wanted to write to us on that gives us a little bit more detail on the specific legalities that you're talking about, I think that would be helpful from our perspective to ensure certainly that we've thought about it and we can give you a response as to how we're managing that particular issue. On the types of emails, I think you mentioned, so there was an issue with certain domain names earlier on, and that's because that particular domain host was flagging the emails as spam and therefore holding back them being issued to the applicants. We've now resolved that so that you shouldn't notice any difference between whatever type of domain name you're using, so whether that's a Gmail, Hotmail, or Outlook, or Yahoo. That issue should now be resolved. And the Minister said there's a small backlog that we're working through, but just because of the way the system's operating at the moment, we're expecting that to be cleared relatively quickly. Again, I think you mentioned there about whether you were able to use the same email address to apply on someone's behalf. There was an issue at the start of just the sheer volume of people coming through that we had to put a hold on a number of applications, and we're going to need to come back to them to clear that particular backlog. But as of now, you should be able to type in the same email address, Claire, and access the portal and apply on behalf of your parents, and the facility is there for you to do that 3 times. That's a total of 4 applications. 4 times that you'd be able to get onto the portal until it's flagged as a fraud risk. And you rightly mentioned scams. You will have, I'm sure you all follow our Twitter handle. You know, there's been an intensive amount of comms that has tried to make people as aware as possible of exactly what the application process is, and importantly, what the department will not be doing. So we won't ask you for your bank details. And it's great to have the support of the third sector organisations in Northern Ireland to get that message out. And I was listening to the radio yesterday morning. I heard the police as well, the BSNI, giving their message and exactly what people need to do if they're aware of those scams. And I think would welcome your support as well, members of the committee, in ensuring that message is out there, particularly as the Minister mentioned, for those vulnerable members of our society that unfortunately are targeted by these individuals. And then finally on the fraud, there's anti-fraud measures built into the process at every stage, and all of our partners and contractors within their systems are actively trying to mitigate against the risk of fraud, and also as a department, we have a responsibility to assess fraud and take action against fraud when it's become known, and that's a significant work stream within this project.
Minister,
I hope that answered all your questions. Sorry, Claire, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I know you're a little bit pushed for time, but Sinead has a question.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Can we bring Sinead into the spotlight, please?
Thank you very much, Minister, and it's been a long morning for you. First of all, I just want to say I've had a career in business representation here in the Northwest, and I can absolutely assure you I've never, ever met any business that has pushed pulling down the administration or the institutions of government. What businesses need in the marketplace is certainty, and certainly pulling down the bricks and the institutions of government would not help them at all, and not help investors. So I just want to put that in the record. But leaving that aside, I assume, Minister, that you would concur that Brexit is responsible for us losing some of our skilled EU workers and not the protocol. And therefore there's a bit of hypocrisy here when ministers are crying over spilt milk, because this was entirely predictable. So what preparations have you made and your predecessors made in order to plan for skill shortages that we've actually are experiencing at the minute? So that's the first question. I'll give you the other 2 questions that I have here, because I know your time is probably being pushed now at the minute. So the second question I would like to ask is, Minister, I hear an awful lot about the problems of the protocol, and I do agree. There are difficulties with the protocol, but the protocol is there because of Brexit, and that is a difficulty, and we need to overcome them. But there's also opportunities around the protocol, and your department has a role, and indeed Invest ANI has a role to promote protocol opportunities. But to me it feels a bit like Voldemort, there we speak his name, or that name of opportunities, and it's so important that at this time when we have a lot of challenges in our economy, that we use every lever that we have to push the opportunities for investors and businesses here in Northern Ireland. And I'd like to think that you wouldn't be a barrier to any of that, or your department wouldn't be a barrier to any of that. But I'd like to know specifically what opportunities are you promoting that gives us a unique position. And thirdly, we need to make sure that the economy is levelling up for every place in Northern Ireland. We've had 1,621 jobs announcements in Belfast this year. How many job announcements have been made in Derry since January?
Okay, Sinead, thanks very much for your questions. And the first one is in regards to the skills shortage. And this is something clearly that I am aware of and taking action on. That's why, first of all, at the UK government level, I've made representations to ensure that we have that flexible migration system in place, so that if we do have an immediate deficit of skills, that we have the ability to source those skills from elsewhere. But I hope that you'll be familiar with the skills strategy that my department had put out for consultation. That has been really well received by stakeholders, and that's where our focus needs to be in the longer term, is making sure that people in our society have the skills that they need for the opportunities that are going to be there for them. I have said I want a healthy economy that works for everyone, no matter where you're from, no matter your background, and I want to make sure that we make sure that the skills opportunities are in place so that they can take advantage of those. Look, like other members around this table, I don't think we're going to find common ground in terms of the protocol. Certainly, I've heard so much about the benefits that could potentially come from them, but that has not been my experience. I go back to the issue. The big benefit that has been touted about the protocol is the dual market access, but that is just simply not the case. So many of our manufacturers in particular, even if they wanted to export into the EU, which of course many of them do, the difficulties arise when they source their component parts from the rest of Great Britain. So what I want to do and what my focus is on is ensuring that we find solutions, that the government and the EU step up and actually deliver what they promised that they would deliver for Northern Ireland. Finally, the member had talked about regional balance and levelling up. And I've said already that I want to make sure that we have a healthy economy that works for everyone, and that means no matter where you come from, no matter your geographical location. And I hope that I, in some way, demonstrated my commitment to serving everybody in Northern Ireland and all parts of Northern Ireland. When one of my first visits was to the Northwest, and I was able to see the progress that had been made in relation to the medical school. I was able to see what has taken place at Seagate and the incredible opportunities that are being created there. Yesterday I was at Catalyst, and they now have their site in Londonderry, and there are incredible opportunities there as well. There are many exciting and energising and engaging projects that are going to come from the City deal as well. So that's where my focus will be. I don't have the specific numbers that she has requested for her own constituency. That being said, so many of the jobs that have been created will allow people to work from home, and I actually think that's good for local towns as well. We still have a hybrid working to allow people that might previously not have taken advantage of those opportunities because of a daily drive to another town or city will now be able to do so. But I stand ready to help where I can. My department stands ready. Invest NI, all to do what we can to ensure that we can all benefit from the opportunities that we have in Northern Ireland, because our skills, our talent, our people are from all over Northern Ireland, and I want to see that reflected in the jobs that we have. That's why I am fully supportive of the 10X vision, along with other stakeholders, and why we're bringing in these other supporting documents as well, be it the skills strategy, the energy plan, the associated documents in terms of tourism or whatever else it might be, because I do want to see everyone, regardless of who you are, regardless of where you're from, benefit from the strong fundamentals that we have in our economy and the opportunities that can come from them.
Minister, thank you very much for that answer. And with the greatest respect, and you'll always be welcome in my hometown in Derry, but it's not visits that we want, it's jobs. 2 weeks ago, you announced 100 jobs for Argo. Last week or yesterday, you announced jobs for in Belfast as well, another 180. Last month, it was 120 jobs in Tribe. The month before, June, it was 771 jobs in PwC. In June, it was also 180 jobs with Vision One in Belfast. Again, in February, in KPMG, it was 200 jobs in Belfast. In January, it was 7 jobs in Evercoat. Derry has not been mentioned since the beginning of the year. What's wrong? That all adds up to about 1,621 jobs in Belfast. That's not even enough. And we welcome your visits, but it's the jobs that we want, to be perfectly honest. And we can't level up, and we can't deal with the regional disparity and the sub-regional inequalities unless you make that decision to be a policy choice within your department and direct Invest NI to do so. And you haven't done it, and your predecessors haven't done it. And for all the goodwill in the world, you can't talk about economic recovery when we're actually excluded from any type of economic recovery until you deal with the foundation stones of what that means in this region.
Well, look, I'm pleased that despite what the member has said, that I'm still welcome to visit her in her constituency, and I'll be happy to do that at any time. And we will continue through Invest NI and whatever other opportunities we have to point people to where there are opportunities, and I will not be behind in doing that. I want to make sure there are opportunities and jobs created right across Northern Ireland. I do think it is positive, though, that some of those jobs that you've mentioned, although the businesses may be headquartered in Belfast, there is still the working from home aspect, which means it will be easier for people right across Northern Ireland, regardless of their location, to maybe apply for jobs that would not previously have been the case. But I always stand ready to help. As a committee, it is your job to advise and assist me in policy formulation. And if there are specific requests that you have, if there are changes that we think that you think that we can make, my door will always be open to hear those ideas and to receive that help from you, because it's my goal to help all areas of Northern Ireland and everyone, regardless of geographical location.
Well, I have lots of ideas, so I'll be knocking on your door on Monday, but they're not wanted here. I state them here very, very regularly, what needs to be done in relation to developing the economy of the Northwest and the region. So I'll take you up on your offer. Expect a phone call.
Okay.
Minister, thank you very much for your time this morning, and I'm sure we'll have you back soon, probably to debate the protocol and Brexit again, but...
I can't wait. I can't wait.
If you're still a minister.
Well, I hope I'll be able to convince you.
Or if there's any ministers.
I hope I'll be able to convince you.
Okay, members. Minister, thanks for your time, and apologies for keeping you slightly over that time. Members, we are going to, would you want to pick up on some issues first of all, Peter?
We've a number of bits and pieces, Chair, that we've made notes of, and we'll follow up directly with officials through our Dallo readout. And then if there's anything else members want to highlight that occurs to them at a later stage, if they can send us an email through, then we can add that.
Can I add one? The Minister mentioned additional actions in the Economic Recovery Action Plan in relation to Innovate UK and bids that were worthy of support but didn't get support. Just can we clarify what that's in relation to? And Peter, we were going to propose that we move the correspondence in the agenda to be dealt with by correspondence if members are content.
Members are content. Perfect, thank you.
Okay. And so then moving on to any other business, none has been indicated. And so item number 15 then is the date, time and place of the next meeting, which will be next Wednesday morning. And just to advise members that we have 3 briefings next Wednesday, and so as a once-off, that is a second once-off, we will have a 9:30 start just to get through those briefings. And there is a informal meeting tomorrow morning with Ballantyne Building Solutions to discuss the Integra Spec ICF building system, which is the insulating concrete formwork. So that will be 11 a.m. via Teams, and I think we've already had the link, but we'll probably get it again.
We send that again, Chair, plus there's a couple of videos that members might want to see with that as well, so we'll send that all out later on.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound.